Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition. The last edition this week, in fact, and the last edition you'll hear until Tuesday, assuming you're a daily listener, of the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more from across these disunited states of America and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Jane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, folks. Good morning, Washington, D.C. and Kansas City. Before I get into the headlines, a quick reminder, update. I haven't said that before this week, so I'll say it now. And again, throughout the show, we're going to be off on Monday. Memorial Day weekend, and of course, Memorial Day, federal holiday in the United States, May 31st. That's Monday. We're not going to be on the air. We will be back, however, on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. And we hope wherever you are, you have the Memorial Day weekend off in full. That would be nice. That'd be nice. Of course, wherever you are, it's really only including the continental United States or the United States in general, where those federal holidays apply internationally. I think most of you do not have that day off, I'm sad to say. But anyway, I'm just now talking. Let me get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, there were more than 27,600 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, with about 1,339 new deaths. That's another 2 days in a row of a high death count. This second one, because Maryland added a bunch of unreported deaths yesterday. Previously, it had been Oklahoma. Over the past week, there has been an average of 22,999 cases per day. That's a decrease of 35% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 40% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 50% of residents have received at least one dose. There's something terrible inside of me that wants the vaccination numbers to stay like this forever, just because they're round numbers. 40% fully vaccinated, 50% partly vaccinated. It'll be like 42 point something and 53 point something soon enough, and that's just scary. Hard to keep track of. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,234,000 people across the United States and killed about 593,000 people. Japan is extending a state of emergency and lockdowns in Tokyo and several other key areas for another 3 weeks, as hospitals in those areas simply remain too full. This extension puts the expiry of the lockdowns at just barely a month before the country is due to host the Summer Olympics. The Summer Olympics have received pushback from the Japanese public, of course, over concerns of coronavirus proliferation. In national news, Senate Republicans yesterday unveiled their nearly $1 trillion infrastructure package, about $940 billion. A decent-sized package. We'll be coming back and talking about that tomorrow. Not nearly as large, of course, as Biden's plan, which he has been stepping down to meet their plans, which they have been stepping up, coming closer and closer, it seems, to something. Patrisse Cullors is stepping down from her leadership position with the Black Lives Matter Foundation. Today is her last day at the job. Rejecting their move is in response to recent allegations that she had used donations to the BLM Foundation to fund personal real estate purchases. She says that she will instead be working on the upcoming release of her second book and a multi-year TV development deal with Warner Brothers. In the wake of her departure, the foundation is bringing in two senior interim executives. Those are Manifa Bandale, that's a BLM organizer and the founder of the Malcolm X grassroots movement in New York City, and Makani Temba, that's an early backer of the BLM movement and chief strategist at Higher Ground Change Strategies. What would have been the headline event at next week's centennial remembrance of the Tulsa Race Massacre has been canceled due to, quote, unexpected circumstances with entertainers and speakers, end quote, that would be remembering the Tulsa Race Massacre, which occurred a century ago in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, involved the killing of over 300 individuals, mostly black. Another 800 reportedly were injured, and about 30 blocks of black-owned businesses were burned and destroyed in what was known as Black Wall Street, a sort of booming contender for a black-run, industrial sort of community, productive community in Tulsa, Oklahoma that was destroyed due to racially motivated riots, protests, and violence broadly in the early 20th century. In international news, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko are meeting in Sochi today. following heightened tensions between Belarus.
Belarusian.
Belarus. Belarus.
No, Belarusian.
Belarus.
Yeah, Belarus.
I've heard it so many different ways.
I always heard Belarus.
I've heard it a couple of different ways, but I hear you. Belarus. Are meeting in Sochi today following heightened tensions between Belarus, Russia, and the EU over the Belarusian hijacking of a Ryanair plane, reportedly in order to prevent a nuclear threat, but evidently in order to detain two political dissidents aboard the plane. Since that move, which has been universally condemned in the Western press, Russia has turned away several European flights who avoided Belarusian airspace and sought to use Russian airspace instead. And again, Putin and Lukashenko are today meeting. Germany has for the first time recognized that its colonial troops committed genocide against the Herero and Nama tribespeople in the early 20th century. The German government will give a cash payment of 1.1 billion euros to the descendants of the victims, as well as to the government of Namibia, the country now sited on the territories where those tribes lived. In earth and science news, Sri Lankan service personnel have been deployed to clean up millions of particles of microplastics mixed with oil that have washed ashore after being spilled by a chemical container ship that caught fire and has been spewing smoke and hazardous material for about a week now. That Singapore flagged ship is currently anchored off the coast of Sri Lanka's capital. I would not recommend roasting marshmallows on that fire. It is, again, a chemical container ship, so you would not want to eat those s'mores. In business news, Washington, D.C.'s District Attorney Carl Racine filed suit against Amazon for, quote, unfairly inflating prices and abusing its monopoly, end quote. Amazon currently holds between 50 to 70% of the market for online retailers. For comparison, the next two largest competitors, those would be Walmart.com and eBay, both only have about 5% individually. Amazon disputes these claims and stated that, quote, if Attorney Racine wins this pursuit, they will be forced to raise prices on deliveries for consumers. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another day where there's actually quite a bit to talk about. Basically, any one of these headlines this morning, we could follow up on it, but I'll go back to one of the earlier ones. The Senate Republicans with their bill. Their infrastructure bill.
Yes.
Nearly $1 trillion bill, significantly smaller than Biden's. This is coming on, the tails of news, on the heels of news that Biden is going to be spending, he's planning to spend approximately $6 trillion in a 2022 fiscal year, largely because of these big plans that he's putting together and trying to get through to the public. That price tag is probably going to drop over time if Republicans drive the size of these bills down even further. What are your thoughts, though, Jamarl?
So it's interesting, right? I think that this, on some level, gets across approves my brand of politics. Meaning, in my head, the whole bipartisan thing is nonsense. The people float to the point of where they have the political power in a contest. And the Republican Party, if the Republican Party believes that its life or its party is existentially threatened just because, oh my God, we can't maintain this particular position, they will change. Now, the catch becomes, do you have somebody on the other side that means it? And the answer is no. And so it's this kind of weird thing of, let's say for the moment, Biden was the person that they say he is, that they cast him. He's the new Bernie Sanders. I mean, Bernie Sanders basically has taken office. Let's say Biden was that guy. Let's say Biden was really for it. Like he really meant it. He was on it. $15 an hour minimum wage. He would have used Kamala Harris. He would have been out there screaming bloody murder at Joe Manchin, at
Sinema.
Thank you, Sinema. He would have been doing that. That's what people do when they mean it. Or he would have, these policies that he's screaming about, he would have a pathway to get those policies through, even if he has to be a bit of a brute to do it. But that's not the guy that's in office. What they bring up is a caricature, and what they bring up is what Biden talks about. But the catch is, they are moving. They're moving. Like the very act, meaning it's true that Biden is moving on his numbers. Okay, fair enough. But what if Biden didn't move on his numbers? Well, Republicans have still moved. Yes, they had to move. How do you tell 600,000 people that have gone up in flames? I guess you don't tell them anything. You tell the people who are left. But how do you tell the America, we don't care about you on this level after all of this, and let's just get back to business as usual? And how do you have that argument as a Republican Party against a Democratic president who's basically screaming, I want unions built America, $15 an hour minimum wage. I want to give this and that. How do you push back against that? I know. We go with our own populace. We're going to build our dinosaur to take down their Godzilla, that type of stuff. But that's what's taking place. I'm making the point that their positioning is changing just based on this kind of the weight of this political force that Biden has at his disposal. That, by the way, he'd never use. That's the aggravating part about that. It's like, we've had Republican guests on the show, and they would say, Democrats are using that 600,000 dead thing. Yes, they are. And they would say, this looks like the way George Bush is using the 9/11. Yes, emergencies are used to the ends of whoever is in political power. And oftentimes, if you really, really want to get something accomplished, right there, the emergency is used for it. The catch is you get somebody like Biden who doesn't mean it. Like, what if this was Sanders? What would Sanders do? Let's say everything else is the same, but what would Sanders do? A lot of stuff he would have already done. That's the first point. But from the standpoint of his political opposition, yeah, I think he would have been screaming bloody murder at him to try to get the stuff over, and he would not have cared. What he would have kicked the parliamentarian, Sanders. He would have came down from the White House to physically kick the parliamentarian to get her off. He would have never let that stuff stand in his way, and he would have pushed it. And the catch is, what would Republicans have said? They would have said, oh, the socialists isn't off. These are communists. They would have said all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they would have also came back to the table with a deal with no choice, because they're not going to tell America you're not worth $15.
I don't know, man. It's convenient to be able to say that Sanders would have done all that, but at the end of the day, it is.
It totally is.
But at the end of the day, no, he wouldn't. No, he wouldn't. I don't just mean the hyperbolic stuff. No, of course he wouldn't have come down to kick Kirsten Sinema. He would have sat there with his hands crossed in mittens on that one chair, like that meme that everybody saw of Sanders that was used all over the place. He would have done that sort of thing. Sanders is also up there in his years, and while he has some sort of spiritual ferocity that you can tell when he says words, he's not gonna. I don't know, man. I just don't see. These people are too old, and I'm a jerk. I'm a young jerk.
It's true,
but it's
they got
true.
some age on 'em.
These people are what you need, as far as I can tell. If you want the kind of thing that you're talking about, if you want real anger, if you want the left version of Newt Gingrich for the 2021.
No, I don't want that.
Well, maybe you do if you're talking.
No, I don't
screaming
want that.
to high heaven.
Yeah.
You people don't care. You people don't care. I hear you, Jamarl.
I mean, look,
you people want these 600,000 to die screaming in agony. What we need is Medicare for all. That's
that I do think should be used.
That's exactly. Well,
Because,
isn't that the left Newt Gingrich? Isn't that the?
I don't think that's the left Newt Gingrich to point out that all of these Americans have died. Do you not have a heart? I think that's like, or do you not care about America, or that type of stuff, or like Ted Kennedy when he was screaming like bloody murder, like, how much more do you care, or you hate these Americans, your fellow Americans, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
That, I do think works. But no, I don't want vitriolic politics. I mean, it gets that way just because of the things that are involved, right? Where it's not just we're just playing chess and we get up and your feelings are hurt.
Well, here's another idea, and maybe this is historically malinformed or something, but you look at we've talked. You look at Parliament, British Parliament, and how agitated they are and aggressive and spirited the debates, and practically throwing everything up to throwing mud at each other, slinging mud at each other, but with words, and they have the British wit, and so usually it's pretty interesting to listen to and fun to watch and all that. I feel like American politics, although it might not be quite as British politics, nevertheless has historically had that level of ferocity. I think what Newt Gingrich did in the post-World War II era, we were talking before about the big nap off the show, about this 70-year-long hiatus. This
Contract with America was the wake-up call.
Something like that. In the post-World War II era, maybe there was just a lull in this severity and ferocity of American politics, because things were good by and large. There was the pie, if you can imagine this, the pie was still baking, and therefore the pie was expanding, and therefore there were larger and larger pieces that people could expect to take from it in the future. There was this expectation, okay, we're all getting stuff, you know what I mean? That things are growing, we're all going to do well. And so if you're a rent-seeking investor class, you're like, okay, I'm good. If you're a middle class on the upswing, you're like, okay, I'm good. If you're a working class looking for upward mobility, if you're a member of that, you're like, okay, maybe I can get a home in a couple of years if I save up some money on a single income. These things are all happening.
Shared interests.
Our politics were probably kind because they corresponded with that, or at least kinder. I don't want to overlook the whole McCarthy thing. And a lot of other stuff that legitimately did happen, Cold War and all that. But still, the Newt Gingrich, maybe the return to that kind of, and I think it would be a return, maybe there was a return to that level of ferocity in politics, because that growth trend started to decline a bit, and we're living in the wake of that.
Did the growth trend decline, or did, let's say, people get that much greedier? Like, because think about what Bill Clinton did for the moment. Democrats had Congress for, 50 years, if I'm not mistaken. And I think Republicans took it maybe once or twice within the course of 50 years. Like, that's an astonishing amount of time that the Democrats took the House. In fact, it was thought, okay, Democrats will always be able to keep the House just because of the way the numbers look. Well, by the time you got to, let's say, Newt Gingrich, and you had Bill Clinton pushing through NAFTA and the elimination of or deregulation of Glass-Steagall.
Yeah, Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich together.
Yeah, I mean, when you get that taking place, and you get this notion of it's a weird thing for somebody to be put in the government that repudiates government. It's just very strange. It's like, government sucks, put me in. And it's like, what am I expecting that guy to do that hates government? It's the British question, on Brexit, where it's like, all right, trust us on Brexit, the people who don't believe in Brexit.
Yeah.
And why would the public do that? And so it's like, it's that. But in America, we get this weird quirk where, because Democrats have abandoned so much of basically the working class and whatnot, that argument flies. Government isn't working for me, so why should I care about government working at all? Yeah, let's cut my taxes. I want my $2 at the end of the week. It's that stuff comes into play. It's a very weird setup, but people will be voted in that says government sucks. Just like if Democrats screw it up, people will be voted in that says Donald Trump really didn't lose the presidency. Joe Biden is a false president and a repudiation of America. And as they repudiate America, it's a very weird thing eating itself in the way that it seems to be working. But yeah, yeah.
Let's close it. Let's go into our breaks. We can come back. You can do your monologue. We can do our soapbox segment, get into our conversation. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. You know, getting back to the point for the moment. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Shane's right. Maybe we do want a Gingrich on the left. Maybe we do want an animal for our side, somebody who we can put steroids in and that will go out there and scream bloody murder for America. Maybe that should be a contract for America that was coming from the standpoint of the left. And would that be wrong? Think about it for the moment. If the Butcher Temp wasn't for the idea of Trump, if they weren't screaming, Trump, 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 as they're knocking down windows and scaring Kevin McCarthy to his, to his heart. If it wasn't that for the moment, it was all of these people have died. You guys aren't responding in the way that you should be responding. How are you leaving America to fend for itself on this? How are you allowing all of these businesses to be shut down and left to their own devices? How are you allowing the upper class to just pilfer the funds that were supposed to be going to small businesses? How are you doing that? Why are you this incompetent? If it was that, I would not have been on this platform screaming bloody murder about it. I would have even potentially said, that's just. But that's not what took place. We had people screaming, Trump, Trump, Trump. We had Kevin McCarthy running away, trying to get away. And yet, Kevin McCarthy, right now, Trump has a part in this party. And all of those people who said Trump needs to be condemned because their life was on the line, a few days later got their mind right when they realized, oh, we're going to need those campaign donations. And not just those campaign donations, we're going to have people very angry at us if we go against Donald Trump. We bend the knee, we give the hand. Donald Trump. Like I said before, this is not an issue of policy. This is an issue of loyalty. Liz Cheney, 90-something% voted with Trump. It's not about policy. It's about fealty and allegiance. But coming back to the moment for this notion of Republican contract with America, maybe you do need something like that. Because the fact of the matter is, this notion of bipartisanship is not for the sake of bipartisanship. If one guy says, hey, I would like to build 3 concentration camps, and the other guy said, let's build 2, the guy that's saying, let's build 2, is not necessarily doing a great job for that particular country. And I know that's somewhat of a hyperbolic reference, but you get my point. Just because a particular party comes out and gives this kind of feign, oh, we're going to push back in this kind of weak way, there's a secondary question on whether or not it is representing the interests of the public in the country to which they represent. I can go down the list in regards to policy and show you how dramatically different the party that is supposed to represent those ideas are away from those ideas. And that's not, again, just from the standpoint of the left, that's from America in and of itself. So what's wrong? How did it get that way? And if the party that is supposed to represent those ideas and is supposed to be this kind of relief valve to the capitalistic system is not indeed the relief valve to anything, then what? You have 2 political parties, and these guys have basically cornered the market. And they cornered the market in a way that doesn't necessarily deal with the main thing. So you have America blowing a gasket. You have people rioting on the streets. You have people running in the Capitol. And now they're thinking, okay, something needs to change. Something needs to adjust. And yet, the good times were so good that we don't want to give those good times up. And so instead you have, I'm going to talk like FDR while not being in any way FDR. I don't even think, if I'm being honest and brutal, that Biden has the physical stamina to do that stuff if he wanted to do that stuff. I don't think he could do it. I don't think he could stand up there and scream and screech and yell and wave his fist. And so maybe, if it's representing the right things, is it wrong? I'm going to say no. Maybe Shane is right. Maybe what I am talking about is somebody that is that much more verbose, that much more aggressive, that much more willing to basically tear it and burn it down if it is not as necessarily working for the interests of his constituents. Of course, however, the interest of his constituents is America itself. Is that wrong? I guess my point is no, I don't think it's wrong. Instead, we get Joe Biden trying to sell his infrastructure budget that is in no way going to go through. I'm telling you what is going to take place. If I am Mitch McConnell, what I would do is I would say, hey, we're going to negotiate. We're going to negotiate. We're going to, we're struggling on this. We're struggling. They spent trillions in tax cuts, putting it on the budget. But, we're going to negotiate over a few $1 trillion for America. I mean, even from the standpoint of trying to get them to invest in the country, they had to use the excuse of China. Think about how sad that is. In order for the leaders of your country, people who are supposed to represent your interests, regardless of your political distinction, in order to get an argument to represent you and to invest in you, they had to invoke China. You, in and of itself, wasn't enough to do it. How weird is that? And how strange is that? And is that what, I mean, I don't know what that is, but that is some kind of weird political stuff that's taking place where Biden is literally arguing China is the reason that we're doing this. What about maybe America just deserves it because America deserves it? Why is that wrong? Look, my basic point is this. From the standpoint of having somebody to represent the interests of America, that would be a newbie. And Shane makes a good point. Bernie Sanders is like 90. He's almost 150 years old now. And that is me being gentle. And yes, he has a ferocity of spirit. He is a vigorous man. He runs 20 miles a day, all that good stuff. But he has some age on him. And you can see that age when it came around to come into the second presidential election, and it was all right, I'm going to put up my fight. Ugh. All right, I gave it my good college go. But it wasn't in him. It wasn't this blood sport where you're willing to say Joe Biden is lying about civil rights to say it in the middle of South Carolina. That's not that. He didn't have that in him. And that's something different. When Obama was running against Hillary Clinton, Obama was basically like, she's lying about this. And Hillary Clinton was like, oh my God, I can't believe he's lying. Yes. It's a knife fight in the phone booth sometimes in regards to getting in. But that's when you want it. But what does it mean to want it? But to want it for America. And I know people use that often. I'm talking about that from the standpoint of what does the majority of the public want and who is the avatar to deliver what the majority of the public want and is willing to do what is necessary to do it, even if it was 51 votes, even if it was ripping down and burning the filibuster, dancing on his graves and invoking your particular policies with the notion that America says, oh my God, I can't believe that guy did that. We love him. Applause. Let's put him in office. Let's put his party in office and keep it in office. And you protect yourself in that way, not in this quibbling about, okay, it's a race to the bottom, race to the bottom. How can we, Republicans are horrible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh God, if we get rid of the filibuster, what are we going to do when we lose? Something other than that. Shane, what are your thoughts on that? I think it's like, as you said, I was like, maybe you're right. Maybe it is what we were looking for. This kind of monster, this Godzilla of the left. Maybe that's what right. Because if you think of FDR for the moment, you get to the Eisenhowers of the world, and Eisenhower's like the New Deal states. That's where he's at. That's the Republican Party at that point. That's like it literally shifted to get to the point with the New Deal states. Now the catch is, why is the Republican Party changing now? Is it because Biden has taken this kind of new tact where they realize, okay, we can't compete with that. That guy on some level could. Meaning, why are they shifting in regards to their political space where they're orienting around Trump? And does it have anything to do with this kind of orientation realignment with the other party and the way other parties trying to realign? I don't think those things are separate and distinct from one another. I do think somebody like that, though, may work. What are your thoughts?
Trump was an independent political player, which meant that he could come up with his own policies. Now, those policies were ad hoc often, but they were responsive to what a lot of people in his base wanted. He seemed to have that sort of instinctual connection with them. And because he was an independent actor who came in and kind of revolutionized the Republican Party, that's how you get those, the genuinely open window and the breath of fresh air of wind coming in and sweeping up the room, changing things around. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The Democrats, meanwhile, are stagnant in a basement for about, I don't even know how many decades when it comes to new ideas. You had, of course, the pushing out of Sanders notoriously in the 2016 election, to much more publicity than you saw in 2020. And I would argue that that's simply because there was less to report on, although some would say that the media has just been increasingly co-opted since then. So what there was in 2020 wasn't as well covered as what there was in 2016. Regardless, though, coming back to the Newt Gingrich thing, if I wanted that radical shift in politics with specifically that as their focus, yes, you'd want another Newt Gingrich, specifically on the left, specifically a younger one, not a Sanders, but somebody in their late 30s, 40s, 50s even, something like that, with, enough blood in their veins, enough vitality, enough motivational energy or something, you get exactly what I'm saying, to push back in the way that Sanders not only wouldn't, but frankly couldn't, as was revealed back in 2016 when he didn't seriously push back against his own being pushed out of the election by the DNC. But I don't think I want that. I don't think I want that specific kind of radical change. If I want radical reorganization, I'd want it to be to make our government better. And I don't see that. I don't see that in the messaging of the left. The closest I see is in the right. But Trump, even for all he talked about kicking the swamp out, that's not the level of critical thinking that I want in a leader. I don't want somebody who's talking merely about draining the swamp. I want somebody who's talking about institutions. I want somebody who comes into Congress and is like, understands the inner workings, knows where the bad spots are, and has a coherent, presentable idea for how to make things better. You talk about what the 51% want, Jamarl. If you live in a propagandized reality, how can you have a functioning democracy? If the vast majority, if 70, 80, 90+% of people are politically disengaged and are effectively told what to think by the few glimpses of TV news that they catch, every day, every other couple days, whatever, if if they live in a manicured reality, how do you have a functioning democracy at that point? And how is the opinions of the majority of people on any number of political issues at all relevant? Their opinions are being controlled If you want democracy, the way to save democracy is to get people to think for themselves functionally, because then you actually have a sort of responsive base, not just a reflexive one, but an independent base of thinkers who can, who are informed. That's the goal. You want them to be more informed. You want them to be more engaged. You want them to be more active. If you want a democracy, you want exactly that. But if 51% of people want something right now, do I want that? Or do I just think that, they're saying that because they've been taught to say that by the TV? Democracy as a whole is dead as soon as you get to propaganda as the baseline of communication.
Give me an example of a country or place like that.
That is healthy?
No, that's like that. That represents the thing that you just mentioned.
There isn't one. There isn't one, which is why globally, increasingly, every society, the more that it develops, the more that it's run by propaganda, which is why if there's going to be a shift, it needs to be far more radical and revolutionary, frankly, than any that I see on, people on the left talking about. I'm talking about a different kind of society.
People get terrified when you say stuff like that.
Well, maybe they get excited. And I think a lot more people get excited when you start talking about through the specifics, because I'm not talking about a revolution in the violent sense. I'm talking about a technological outmoding of the way that things previously worked. And it's silly to me. I see some people call me a libertarian. I see some people call me a right winger. I see some people on the right call me a left winger. I don't see anybody with a coherent political philosophy. Yeah. Full stop. And I'm not trying to be critical of any, but I don't see anybody with a new. Okay, this sweeps all of this loose rubble of recent ideological history off the board. Yeah. This is how we really fix things on a deep level, including the corruption, the economics, scientific research. Now, admittedly, these are things I'm excited about, but that's what I want. I don't see that. I don't see that in the conversation. I don't see that in any leader, which is why if we're going to have a Newt Gingrich for the left, I don't want them to be for the left, and I don't want them to be a Newt Gingrich. I want them to be a deep political reformer and somebody who creates a new kind of civilization.
Look, I would love for money to grow on trees. I would love for money to grow as grass. I would love for the world to be able to come together and read Kumbaya and just run into the raindrops. Oh, we're together in this unison. I would love that. I would love that.
Is that more or less likely?
Guy, well, Mark Lamont asks a guy, what is it like to be white? And Mark Lamont is trying to make the point to the guy like, yeah, man, that post this society, love it.
Is that kind of thing more or less likely than Medicare for all? I would argue that kind of thing is more likely because you're not going to get a functioning system like that under the current system. You need a extirpation.
Because what you're talking about is basically something other than whatever this is.
Yes.
Meaning you're not talking about, in fact, you're not even talking about something that's something other than this is for America. You're talking about global. So yeah, I think Medicare for all is a hell of a lot easier.
I think we need another industrial revolution. And is it easier to have flying cars in the post-industrial era or the pre-industrial era?
I know. But
all these pipe dreams.
I know, but look how that turned out. I guess the point that I'm making to you is there is no, I don't think.
It turned out for better. The industrial revolution did a lot of good stuff.
No, it did a lot of good stuff. It also did a lot of bad stuff. And the catch becomes, when this goes forward, what does this go forward as? Meaning,
you can't steer it. You can't predict it. All you can do is hope and try.
Yeah, the hope thing. And the whole thing is going to be steered by people who have very specific interests, either geopolitical, either economic. And in the way that it's been steered now, it's going to continue to be steered in that direction. That's the catch.
I'm glad for the industry. I'm glad, again, using the industrial era as a parallel here, I'm glad that we live in that. Yeah, I think we can more adequately solve the problems of climate change, for instance, as the big no-no that we, a thing we are doing or did or whatever. We can more easily solve that in the post-industrial era than we theoretically could have in the pre-industrial era if we'd started to run into those problems, which you probably would have if you had increasing population expanding throughout the world, humans living in more and more places, those kinds of things.
I don't think you would have hit it if we would have never hit the industrial era. I mean, because we're talking about industrial amounts of energy and stuff like that put into the sky and everything else. So it's that. But I am a fanatic for Star Trek, right? Like, so clearly I'm not going to disagree with you in this notion of, hey, why can't we have this automated place that's a food plant that just makes food and people just go get food? I don't have to have a human being there working, or maybe just one guy that needs Social Security, that works in the evenings and gets paid, etc. Yes, I want that. Where I don't have to, yes, I want that. I want that. By the same token, how do you get that? And that's the catch. It's like all of the ideas are nice, but at the end of the day, you get into this notion of this democratic order where there are going to be people who disagree with you because your idea costs them cash. And those people are going to be hell-bent into destroying not just you, but your idea and, like, clutching to grim earth. Because from their standpoint, what you're talking about is an existential crisis. You're talking about the elimination of them, not just as a class almost, but across the world.
Yeah.
Because that's what you're talking about taking place. So look, usually those things end up in wars. That's why it says some people may love it, some people may hate it, because that's talking about the remove. Like it's the Civil War.
I'm
right?
not calling for utopia. I don't see Star Trek, and I like the vision of Star Trek too, in that kind of utopian society.
Well,
so we use a word
in my
for
head,
it.
using this notion, and utopian is wrong. Well, no, utopian is right.
I think,
in the
I
way
think it's
that I'm
right.
thinking
Yeah,
about
I'm not,
it. Yeah.
I'm not even trying to say it's the most perfect or whatever. But what you need is a way to completely undo the rent-seeking classes. If you have a class of elites who are in charge of the functions of the economy, who can make all the money you can make off the economy, who have in their hands the reins to steer things in directions that benefit them.
But that's my point. That's my point.
If it gets stagnant, here's my problem with it. It's not just that there's elite ownership of it. It's that they stopped doing a good job. If there were elites and they were doing a good job, I would be okay with that. To
I would not
better,
be okay
better
with
or
that.
lesser extent.
Because the problem is you always run into this
I don't
thing
need
of,
to be one of the elites. I'm okay with being a
no, I
member of the
think my
public,
issue is
to be clear.
the organization of the system itself. Yes, let's say you get a good year. Let's say you get 3 good years. Let's say you get 20 good years. At some point, you will have somebody says, "Hey, we think we can pull a little bit out of this."
Totally. That's just how it
I mean,
works, though. But that's any
that's
kind
my
of
point,
political
though. The
system.
system, whatever particular system you come up with,
Yeah.
it has to go beyond just this notion of just good people and good leadership.
Which is why I want deep renewal. We need to do an
Deep renewal, deep indelible renewal.
not indelible. Well, no, it's just deep. We just
I like
need
indelible. Why not indelible?
because there's nothing indelible, like you just said. At a certain point, you're always going to have some new class of elites that tries to co-opt the system, and that's just how the system works. Frankly,
Do you know that? Or is that just this kind of assumption
Can
because
you
of
have-
the way things are?
can we have an immortal society? I don't know, but so far the jury, while it may still be out, it seems to be heading towards no. You can't have an immortal society. These
immortal
things have life
society.
cycles. It's true, man. In the same way that my cells go through senescence, eventually I die. You have civilizations. They develop certain capabilities.
Right.
Elites take hold. They eventually start to make bad decisions, and the thing crumbles. And maybe it revitalizes itself a couple of times, but the thing crumbles, and you have something along that comes to take its place.
And you can state that with godlike
Certainty.
proclamation.
I
love
can.
that. I love that. He's like, I'm 27 and I know
I understand
it all.
exactly.
No, look, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, is there a situation where if you had a society that basically looked at itself and said, we get that there is no endpoint, and in the context of there being no endpoint, that our job in this case is to continuously change on some level who we are as we develop. Is it possible? I don't know. That's a post society, I suppose, because at that point, that's where you're going to, right? I mean, that's where you get to this point of like, yeah, there's a deep structural, fundamental, different way in the way we organize this.
And we've been talking about it all abstract for quite a while now. I still don't think that we've used the internet in all the ways we could have. I think that, there
yeah, because for profit. It's like people, it's very specific in its interest.
No, is the suppression of information right now for profit? No, that's the thing. Here's the thing. This is where those
No.
criticisms start to fall flat. When you bring up profit, I get you.
No,
and
I mean-
that criticism flies. But as a universal criticism of the problems with power, various governments around the world want to suppress information, full stop.
Yes.
And they're going to do that.
Yes.
Corporations are along for the ride. Corporations just want to make money. Governments want to control heavily as they can what you have access to. Corporations want to market to you, frankly.
Who's their
And
market?
It's true.
And control.
Well, and they want to be the company that's in control of marketing. What is
It's
Facebook
not
and
just
Google?
marketing.
What
I guess
is
that's my point. It's not
Facebook
just
and Google
marketing.
make money off of marketing. That's what they make money off of. They make money off of putting ads in front of your face. Same thing with Twitter. That's how they make their money.
Yeah, but
That's what all these big tech companies want. Governments want to control what you can read and think and do and say and all that stuff. And admittedly, they each have their problems. But I guess my point with the criticism of profit is that at a certain point, it falls flat.
Not on this. Because we're talking about the direction of the internet. Meaning it's not being directed for, it's like, what is the internet being used for currently? Is it being used for the enrichment of humanity, the growth of humanity, or is it being used in the direction of profit with any level of growth and everything else kind of coming along for the ride? It's that one. It could be used for more. That's the point I think you were making before you went into your spill about the whole money is not everything.
That's the thing. You say
And that's
profit
the-
and it steers
but
me
the
off
point that I
every
make-
time, Jamarl.
But yeah,
And I'm
but
like
you
a
didn't-
dog. You
but
throw a
I
ball.
was being very specific here in regards to like how it's being used, the direction it's being used, and the point of it, and could it be used for more?
I hear
Yeah,
you.
I agree. It could be used for more.
It could be used for a lot more, and
Yeah.
we're not thinking as well as we could be. This is where the cryptocurrency stuff gets a bit exciting for me, I'll be honest. And it's not it as a currency or it as an investment vehicle, but the idea, and this is where people go with it, the idea of the blockchain. as an organizational tool for sort of storing the memories of interactions of people in society and creating new quote-unquote applications. And I'm not talking about a phone app. I'm talking about a software system, a sort of algorithmic system for creating how people relate, the rules of engagement between people. If you can have free-form local social systems that accomplish things like housing people or providing food to people. And I'm not talking about nationwide systems because for me personally, that becomes too hard to manage for a single group of people. It creates an outside power structure that takes control of it. But if you have local provision of services completely detached from the functions of the government and without any need for profit-driven systems of incentive, which define companies and corporatism and capitalism and all this stuff, you could solve so many problems, I think.
Well, that's the question. What's next? After this.
Exactly.
Let's assume for the moment that there are no solutions to the problems that capitalism poses. Meaning this notion of, whether you want to say AI and the development of that in regards to national security stuff, whether you want to say this notion of genetics and maybe even where that goes on some level, or even this notion of the environment and this ravenous for profit where the environment is not necessarily taken into account, but the environment has to be taken into account because it's our habitable space. So let's say that those things can't be solved and let's see, even our current government structure. So the question becomes, what's next? And I think people have a hard time seeing that. I mean, we were talking about this yesterday, where Zizek is like, he's a communist, but if you ask him, what does that mean? He gets dodgy. He doesn't know what that means entirely, because he was like, look, I live in a capitalistic system. My framing of the world has been so shifted in this that it's hard to see what's next. I just know that we can't solve some of the problems that we have in the way that we deal with those problems. I mean, look at just one of the problems, just destabilizing. If you're looking at AI, for example, or this ability for cars and those things to basically operate themselves, there is a fiscal incentive for you to get rid of labor. I think people miss that. Like sometimes they think that, well, I mean, they got to give people a job. No, they don't. No, they don't. They don't want you working there. All things being equal, if they can have a machine or a robot to do a particular job, whether it doesn't get blue, doesn't get tired, doesn't get sick, it just does the job. They don't even have to get the lights on for it. It doesn't even complain.
I would want, I'll put it like this.
Like you'd want that guy working, right?
Yeah, if there were a robot dishwasher for my house, that could come out like 5 minutes every couple of days. And like it could wash my dishes and I could talk with it.
Because it's that there is no human suffering involved. Well, meaning it's just doing it. There's no, in the very specific task of the robot is not feeling any pain.
Maybe.
Washing the dishes.
I don't know, man.
I don't want a robot feeling pain washing dishes because that defeats the purpose of having a robot to do the dishes.
Some people might, and who are you to stop them? Say I'm a sadomasochist.
Yeah,
say
that's
for a second,
horrible,
Jamarl,
man. That's
that
horrible.
I wanted to create a robot. Anyway,
I mean, like basically creating a sandbox programmatically.
Exactly.
Where you create life.
You force it to do what you want it
only
to do.
have it suffer.
Oh man, did you ever hear about Rocco's basilisk? You ever
No.
hear about this? I don't even know. There are things called info hazards. Have you heard of the term info hazard? Informational hazard, where the very act of saying them, of spreading them as information, is considered dangerous, and so you're supposed to keep them under lock and
Just
seal.
the very name or the word is subversive.
Exactly.
Wow,
So
that's intense.
Rocco's basilisk is actually what led to the meeting and the eventual marriage and partnership and coupling and kids between Grimes and Elon Musk.
Are you serious?
Yes. So Rocco's basilisk is an internet meme. I happen to be friends on Facebook with the dude who created it, and they both made jokes about it. Elon Musk made a joke about Rococo's basilisk, I think, and Grimes in another video of hers also made a joke about Rococo basilisk, which is like Rococo's like this, Baroque art movement. Rocco's basilisk is, I can explain the meme. Anyway, they met over this. They both made the same joke, and so they bonded over it. And now they have a kid named X Ash Archangel 12, because that's the world we live in, apparently, where these things happen like that. Anyway, Rocco's basilisk is this idea that so think about rogue AI, rogue artificial intelligences, super smart artificial intelligence, and think about, they could exist right now. They could also exist 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now. We could create them ultimately. Now, this is where it gets absolutely insane. Imagine for a second, if you will, that one of those rogue AIs threatens you from the future, that if you don't create it, it will torture you. It will create a simulated version of you and torture that version forever. In other words, unless you do things to help it become creative,
You don't care.
to help it become,
Because ultimately, that's not you.
well, that's not you, but if it simulates you,
So what?
then it's going to be you in that simulation.
Still not you.
Maybe in a sort of panpsychic sense,
Still
it is.
not you.
It could be, maybe.
Still not you.
How do you know?
In fact, I don't even know if that thing is real in the real sense.
I hear you.
Like there's all sorts of stuff that go into that.
Well, you
I
have
mean,
to assume this.
And by the way, that gets
You have to assume
dark.
that it exists, that this AI can do that to you, that there's this imagined AI that doesn't exist yet, that is going to torture you in the future if you don't create it.
I am more concerned with the brain thing being able to pull somebody into some kind of simulation and torture the person in the simulation.
That's what I'm talking about.
Where it's
though.
like the person doesn't die. You just torture the guy
Exactly.
and then pull it. It's like, all right, I want to use this blowtorch. And then all of a sudden you bring the guy back and you just do it again. And
Exactly.
it's like, where are the, bomb? Where's, or whatever else they're going to be screaming at the guy. It's like, oh, our bad.
Well,
We're
Roko's,
going to let you out. Here's $10.
I guess my point is,
Plus.
Roko's Basilisk is a weird inversion of what we were just talking about. We were just talking about you could create an AI, torture it, force it to do the things you want it to do if that's the kind of person you are. Roko's Basilisk is an AI that tortures you into creating it. It's just this. The internet is weird, man, and where people's minds go is weird.
Yeah.
And closing out, we got to go into our break. We're taking calls on all these topics and more when we come back. Some people got so afraid of Roko's Basilisk that they got suicidal. There's
Are you
some
serious?
people who got into this enough where they get. It's just people are weird, and some.
That's so wild.
If you can think
That's
of
so wild.
a
That's so
smart,
wild.
paranoid person who takes things seriously, and they get into the
It's
idea.
like, I saw a text message and it said, Tom for dinner. And I know it's that robot. It's coming after me. It's coming after me, man.
I hear you.
That's intense,
It is
man.
intense. We got to close this out. We're taking your calls. I would say, I don't know, man. Jamarl, I feel like in our own way, we are at the vanguard. We're in Washington, D.C. Who else is doing radio like this?
Nobody.
Nobody. Anyway, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. We're taking your calls when we come back. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we are taking your calls. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, that's 202-521-1320. Phone lines are open. You can call in now. Admittedly, we're opening the phone lines a little bit early this morning, but I don't know. Fascinating conversations, Jamarl. You know, what's the name for that kind of food? Like high-tech postmodern food where they take the ingredients of deconstructed. Have you heard of deconstructed food before?
Yes, I think.
Accidentally, human beings do this all the time. On the air, I just noticed myself putting words together in weird ways.
Yeah.
I come back from the break, and instead of doing my normal flow, the part that should be part 1 is part 3, and if the part that should be part 2 is part 7. And if you listen to the actual sentence, it doesn't technically make sense, but because you're so used to the individual parts of it, your head kind of reconstructs it.
Yeah.
Like those, those sentences where you see individual letters sort of displaced within words, but you know what the sentence.
Yeah. And look, you do it yourself. It's like if you're typing, etc. Your brain entirely ignores the fact that you've just made a mistake.
Yes,
It's very strange.
it's true.
What if scientists come back and say, Shane, we now have the answer to that? And the answer is, and they start explaining how the neurons and everything else fire and the synapses and everything. Would that make you, how would that make you think about that? Would that make you feel like something of the universe has been lost just in having this kind of explanation of this very weird, because it's matter, right? It's just matter, all things being equal, that has a capacity to basically look and appraise this world. And so that matter that has appraised this world has these kind of weird quirks in the way that it operates. And if somebody's like, look, this is how this works, would something be lost? I know it's a weird question. I guess it's saying, is something lost in the mystery of it if the mystery is lost? I suppose I just answer my question and the answer is yes.
Yes.
But does it matter on some level?
Well, is the feeling of mystery, is the pursuit of that mystery,
Yeah.
the feeling of the pursuit of the answer to that mystery, is that valuable? And I think the answer is categorically yes.
Yes.
You want that?
By the same
Definitely.
token, after you get it, something feels missing.
Something feels missing. But I think the thing is that feeling of missing something turns into curiosity about just some other
Something else.
mystery.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah. Like, think of all the stuff that people have access to right now. Like, in regards to information. Anything you want to know that we have access to, like knowledge of, you can literally go to a personal device, like on Star Trek. And you can say, bleep, bleep,
and
bloop.
notice that when you do that, say you go on a Wikipedia binge down the rabbit hole, so to speak, what happens is you go to one page and you're like, okay, curiosity sated. And then about halfway through saying that sentence in your mind, click, whoop, there's something else. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And then you just keep going ad infinitum.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I guess, we have limited cognitive capacity, so we're never actually going to be able to take it all in.
Right, you can't satiate it, right?
Exactly. Yes, you're just a kind of a cosmic goldfish swimming through this vast maze of opportunities, forgetting after a time, you know, where you came, what it means, where you are in the maze, all that stuff.
It feels so, what's the word for it? When my grandmother passed, I had this thought of, you think of all the things that she experienced, let's say 70 years or however long, I think she was in her 80s. And you think to yourself, all of that stuff is just data. It's just information. And it's information in a way that goes beyond just this kind of flat person, place, or thing. There's coloring to it. There's feeling to it. There's all of this other texture to it that is just kind of there. Bam, up in smoke. Gone.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, how much of, like, all of that's lost. And it's not just like the people who are writing books and everything else. That's a fragment of the individual's consciousness that's in that book. And it's a flat fragment at that. And you think of all of these people who've just went up in smoke, who, you know, people who we know and many people, the majority that we don't, all of that data, all of that information, all of the coloring. I mean, it's very weird and heady when you think about it. Like, there has to be a way, like, on some level to save that. And when you think about, okay, how can you save that data or that person or that something?
Yeah.
It just feels like such a loss.
It's an incredible loss.
Yeah.
It is the loss. I mean,
Yeah.
if you think for a second, the idea that the brain as an organ is an incredibly complicated machine, you know, rivaling in the complexity of the connections between its neurons, that of galaxies, not just stars, but, you know, the filaments that tie together stars in galaxies, these vastly complicated webs. Anyway, that value, and then you're just looking at it materially at that level. If you go through that, okay, what can that brain say to me, literally? How, you know, through using its other organs, using its mouth and its vocal cords, what can it say to me? What can it express?
I didn't even go there. I just went with, like, how can we save the data?
How can we save the data?
I wasn't even greedy. I was just saying,
exactly.
The data.
The person. I'm talking about the person, but the
you're
data.
trying to say the person.
It's two ways. I hear you. Oh, man, we got a lot of calls. I think we should go to them. We're having too much fun in this conversation. But I hope you're enjoying listening to it based on the number of calls. Seems like we might have some takers. Anyway, 202-521-1320. Let us go now to Tarif, calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
How y'all doing? Two comments. China is growing in the Middle East, especially. And now Assad had won an election. I sent the message to the West. You know, they have reports that they have a company that was pumping the oil out of Syria, basically stealing the oil from Syria, might be packing up and leaving. So you never know, the troops might be pulling out because of it. And China talking about sending aid to Israel. They want a two-state solution. They have a paper that reported by Helga LaRouche that the Global Times said something about, okay, in her words, like, China is now preparing for the unavoidable eventuality of a major crisis of the transatlantic financial system. And it's by the Global Times, you know, China's official paper warns of a crisis might happen in the West. So China's preparing for it to protect itself.
I will put it like this, though. I check Global Times decently often. They will regularly have articles like that up. Now, that doesn't mean that the article is wrong.
I was thinking the same thing.
But they will regularly have those kinds of articles up. And frankly, so do so many, like, alternative investors. The idea that, you know, we should be prepared for some kind of global financial shift, that kind of thing. I don't necessarily disagree with it. I just don't know when it's going to happen. And so many people have said that for so long now that it's like the boy who cried wolf or the sky falling. It's like, okay, I don't.
At some point it will, but on which particular day, who knows?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's the boy who cried wolf or it's Chicken Little and Chicken Little's right, and someday the sky does fall, or like the boy who cried wolf. Eventually the wolf comes. That's the whole point. And I don't want to be the party who's listening, but I also don't want to, you know, you got to blame at some point the person who's like, he keeps saying it, keeps saying it, keeps saying it. But when? That's the important fact. When? We all die. I know I'm going to die. But what's useful to me is to know approximately when I will die.
No, it's not.
Hello, Jamarl
No,
says,
it's not.
no, you don't want to know
It's not
that.
useful.
And I hear you. Tarif, we got a couple more callers. I'm sorry. I'm going to move on. Tarif from New Orleans, thank you for the call. Let us go now to Max from South Maryland, talking social change. Max, what's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. You guys have kind of started talking about a little bit about like social existentialism and profit versus, power and things like that. I just wanted to propose like a thought idea that I always kind of get through these conversations with. What I've always known about the argument is if you take capitalism versus communism, okay, two starkly different approaches to society. What I've always noticed is that you're in a capitalist society, you're allowed to practice socialism in our society, in a free, liberal, individually liberal society. You're free to practice socialism. But in a socialist, pure socialist communist system, you're not allowed to practice capitalism because it won't work. So capitalism is kind of a euphemism for freedom. And you would then look at communism or socialism as kind of a restraining system.
That's how the libertarians like to put it. Max, I've got a lot of stuff I could say back to that. In some ways, I agree, but I don't know. Jamar, we've also got 3 more calls, which is why I'm cutting into you kind of early. Yeah. Max, that's a longer point that feels like we'd have to take a segment to talk about it or something like that. I'm sorry about that. Max, interesting point. Thank you for the call. Tom, calling in from Kansas City, talking futurism. Tom, what's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. So I was really interested about the conversation you guys were having about how to move forward in society. And this is a little bit more picking up on what you were talking about as far as capitalism versus different things. And it kind of bounced off of what the other previous caller was talking about. I actually worked for a U.S. government for 11 years. And there's always some people are there to work just as a job. There's some people there, yeah, we love our country, we want to work for a country. There's always a few people, they tend to be very driven, so they tend to percolate to the top. We're there for themselves. They want to get the next rank. They want to get more power for whatever reason. They just have issues. And unfortunately, those few people are okay with sacrificing other people to achieve their goals.
Yes.
That's why when I hear about mass collectivism as the country, I get very, very skeptical.
Same.
Because I've seen it go south so many times.
Same.
But
You create this big machine, big bureaucracy for people to use for their own purposes, to get powerful on, basically.
Exactly. And it could take any form. I would agree that capitalism ends up being that big because we have these big big tech companies who are got way too much power for themselves. It can happen with too big government. That's why I'm big on smaller collectivism. So what can you do locally? What can you do with your neighborhood? What can you do, with your group?
Same. I agree with that completely, and that's why I would consider myself a localist. Like I'm down for that kind of social activity, social organization on a smaller scale because it's kept within bounds. But you create these behemoths, and at a certain point, the incentive for a sociopath or a slew of sociopaths to come in and ride that behemoth and claim it as their own just gets too big. It's going to happen. We don't have the social tools to keep that from happening. Jamarl, any take here?
No, it's only 1 minute. Let's go to either the last caller.
Let's do it. Tom, thank you for the call. Brave, call back in later, please. I saw you dropped. We have Trudy calling in from Bakersfield on UFOs. Trudy, you're on. What's going on? About 20 seconds.
Okay. I just keep thinking about UFOs can't possibly be from Earth because if anyone on Earth had the knowledge to build one, they would have to have help with its construction, to say the least. Many people would have their hands on. Plus, if anybody that yourself, if you had that power, would you rule the world or would you keep the secret?
Yeah, would you use it? I hear you, Trudy. I hear you on that point. Yeah, and the complexity of construction of some of the stuff we're seeing with these UAPs, UFOs, whatever you want to call them. Anyway, Trudy, thank you for the call. We got to go into a break. We'll be back in a minute with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning show. You're listening to Fault Lines, and we'll be right back.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, more than 27,600 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with about 1,339 new deaths. Maryland added many deaths yesterday, or many of those deaths were added in Maryland yesterday. Over the past week, there's been an average of 22,999 cases per day, a decrease of 35% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 40% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 50% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,234,576 Americans, human beings, across the United States, and has killed about 592,938 mothers, sisters, teachers, haberdashers, etc. Japan is extending a state of emergency and lockdowns in Tokyo and several other key areas for 3 weeks as hospitals in those areas remain too full. The extension puts the expiration of the lockdown at just barely a month before the country is due to host the Summer Olympics, which has received pushback from the Japanese public over concerns of coronavirus proliferation. Senate Republicans yesterday unveiled their $1 trillion, roughly, response to the Democrats or Joe Biden's offer, or Joe Biden's push for his infrastructure plan. This has been an interesting back and forth. Joe Biden basically came down on the amount of money that he wanted to spend by, I think it was $500 billion, and Republicans said they were further apart. That it's funny to me, but basically they're giving a counter offer to basically the Democratic Party's push for their plan. Patrisse Cullors is stepping down from her leadership position with the Black Lives Matter Foundation, with today as her last day, rejecting that her move is in response to recent allegations that she's used donations to the Black Lives Matter Foundation to fund personal real estate purchases. She says that she will instead be working on the upcoming release of her second book and a multi-year TV development deal with Warner Brothers. In the wake of her departure, the foundation is bringing in 2 interim senior executives, Monifa Bandel, a Black Lives Matter organizer of the Malcolm X grassroots movement in New York City, and Manika Damiba, an early backer of the Black Lives Matter movement and chief strategist at Higher Ground Change Strategies. What would have been the headline event at next week's centennial remembrance of the Tulsa race massacre has been canceled due to, quote, unexpected circumstances with entertainers and speakers, unquote. The Tulsa race massacre, where over 300 mostly black individuals were killed and another 800 injured. Not to mention that town, which is basically prosperous, exceptional in all the accounting of it, was doing too good for its neighbors, its white neighbors. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko are meeting in Sochi today following heightened tensions between Belarus, Russia, the EU, over Belarusian hijacking of Ryanair plane, reportedly in order to prevent a nuclear threat, but evidently in order to detain 2 political dissidents aboard the plane. Since the move, which has been universally condemned in the Western press, Russia has turned away several European flights who avoided Belarusian airspace and sought to use Russian airspace instead. Germany, for the first time, has recognized that its colonial troops committed genocide against the Herero and Nama tribes people in the early 20th century. The German government will give a cash payment of 1.1 billion euros to the descendants of the victims, as well as the governments of Namibia. The country now sited on the territories where the tribes live. Sri Lanka service personnel have been deployed to clean up millions of particles of microplastics mixed with oil that are spilled by a chemical container ship that caught fire and has been spewing smoke and hazardous materials for about a week now. The Singapore flagship is currently anchored off the coast of Sri Lanka's capital. And last, Washington, D.C.'s District Attorney Carl Racine filed suit against Amazon for, quote, unfairly inflating prices and abusing its monopoly, unquote. Amazon currently holds between 50 to 70% of the market for online retailers. For comparison, its next two competitors, Walmart.com and eBay, both have only 5%. Amazon disputes these claims and stated if Attorney Racine wins his pursuits, they will be forced to raise prices on delivery to consumers. Oh, love that. Love that. Political pressure. Political and economic pressure. You guys, those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. That story right there flows great into a conversation that I had with a gentleman yesterday.
Wait, before you do that, can I get one brief thing?
No,
please.
No, go for it.
Just a quick note. We are not going to be on the air on Monday because it's Memorial Day. We'll be back on Tuesday. I want to do it every hour, basically the top of every hour.
I'm totally joking.
And now that I have chopped off your gonads by coming in and cutting off I'm just kidding. Please continue, Jamarl. You're saying.
Yeah. So I have a conversation yesterday with a gentleman who says John Cena is a punk. John Cena punked out. John Cena punked out. And I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? He said John Cena was made to give an apology to China in Mandarin for basically violating the one China policy.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I said, well, look, from their context, I said the problem is what you're looking at is the world through typically American eyes, that the world revolves around the West. And so things are in American or in English when people speak them. And when things happen, they're doing so because of this kind of political influence of the United States. Well, what you're seeing is political and economic influence of China bending the knee. And he's supposed to be a tough guy. I said, so you're telling me if you're John Cena and you lost, that's it, your accountant say, hey, you violated the one China policy. What's that? Look, you don't need to know what that is, John. You just violated it. You're going to lose 30% of your shirt if you don't go out there and say this. And he says, for a tweet? Yes, John, for a tweet. All right, I put out this tweet. No, John, we need you to say it. And we need you to say it in Mandarin. What? Yes, do it. Now, John Cena could be the tough guy. Like, I'm not doing that. And he could walk out there and say, screw China, I don't care about that. But no,
he did it.
He's a capitalist.
He did it.
And he went out there and he bent the knee. And
just think about that.
And I asked him, I said, if that was you, what would you do? He was all into it until that was said. He's like, what? Well, and then after maybe 20 minutes, well, he can handle it. No, buddy. You had to come back and think of that. Meaning the moment that I said that, you was like, oh, you froze too when somebody says 30% of your shirt is going to go.
Well, speaking of 30% of your shirt, you say he's a capitalist. Wouldn't it have been good for his... Aren't there so many women and men? He's a bodybuilder. Who would have wanted to see John Cena with only 70% of his shirt on or something?
Right.
I kid.
Right.
I didn't even know who this dude was. But yeah, professional wrestler. I knew he was an actor. I knew that much about him. But I didn't realize. Also a rapper, apparently.
Is he?
There was back in the mid-2000s.
I just remember him as a wrestler.
There was a wave.
As an actor.
Exactly. But yeah, wrestler, bodybuilder. Yeah. That's where the physique joke about
he's a tough guy. He's this big tough guy. He's just got broken like a boy. Broken like a boy.
Yeah.
And look, man, your world is... China is considering itself a peer. It has a rover on Mars. They're talking about building satellites around the moon and Mars or something like that with Russia.
There's a bunch of money floating around, and they have a fairly vibrant, technologically focused society. And I don't like their authoritarianism, and that's why, frankly, I want the U.S. to be viable tomorrow.
Yes.
I don't just want the U.S. to fade away. I don't want that to happen.
I don't.
Ultimately, I want us to be a viable, independent, sort of not isolated, but like self-possessed and self-concerned power that simultaneously is using its vast industrial abilities and vast human capital, quote unquote, abilities. The people who live in this country, I want them to be working on productive things, creating new technology that takes us to the moon and beyond and cures disease and all that stuff. And that's just not just my pipe dream. My point is, instead of focusing on the competition with China, and specifically focusing on military and naval suppression, it would be really cool if we used that competition to spur a lot more technological progress. That's my own little thing.
Sputnik is in space. We got to get on the ball.
Exactly. We got to do that kind of thing. But
right.
having said that, I want to come back to what we were talking about. China making a decent amount of money. There's a bunch of money floating around.
NBA, same thing.
And they are pretty influential in the U.S.
Yes.
There's no getting away from that. And I'm not even talking about the political system. You can just look at media. People complain over in Silicon Valley about growing Chinese influence, and a lot of them admittedly are right-wingers, at least the ones that I see complaining about it. But if you look a couple of years ago at Hollywood, for instance, look at the kinds of movies that were coming out. You remember that spate of series of like, okay, let's remake Ghostbusters. Let's remake XYZ. Let's remake The Lion King. Part of what's going on, and a lot of people
on China too. 1.3 billion human beings.
Well, but
money.
There's the thing. A lot of people, fairly wealthy people in China, from what I hear, were parking their money in Hollywood, and a lot of screenwriters who are relatively lazy people, at least with all this new money coming in, we're like, let's just do a rewrite. Let's just do a renovation on this old product 20 years back. We can kick it up a notch, redo it in live action with better graphics and more engaging script and more up-to-date references. We'll put this out there, make a ton of money, and our benefactors, who were in a lot of these cases Chinese, would also make money. But my point is, that's their influence on our cultural system.
Yeah.
You can bet they're going to have influence on our political system too, but you can also bet we're going to do our best to do it the other way around. We're going to try to influence them too, and we have successfully over the course of decades. My point is, they do influence us. But for John Cena to not want to lose 30% of his shirt was probably a career mistake.
I mean, I don't know how much money it was. I just kind of was postulated, what if it was 30%? What would you do? I mean, he's just so gung-ho, like, I can't believe that John Cena. And I was like, well, I mean, does China have a point? He said, well, I don't care whether China has a point or not. What would Taiwan say? I say, yeah, but what does China say? And how do you square that? And however a person wants to square it, John Cena squared it into saying, I need to keep my shirt. I need to keep all of my shirt. I need to keep all of my shirt. So there was that part. This other aspect, or this other headline, the one with Germany, is fascinating to me. So if you know that I can commit genocide, get away with it, but I'm going to have to pay 2 billion euros 100 years later, does that incentivize genocide? Now, I know that's a brutal thing to ask, and I don't mean that people are going to just say, hey, let's just do this willy-nilly. But there's something warped or weird. I think it's the squaring of justice, where it's just not fair, where it's like, all of this took place back then. Okay, here's a price tag on it. But the price tag doesn't quite work in some kind of weird way, even though that's all they have to kind of fix it, if that makes sense, or balance it.
Well, that's the thing. And if they didn't do this, the call, okay, but what are you guys going to do about it? That would be the call. Okay, you're saying there's a genocide, but are you going to help them in any way? And then how are you going to help them? Well, the answer would be money. Yes, but I get your point too. I'm interested in the weird and probable back-end connection politically between France, with Macron yesterday in Rwanda. We were talking about this in our headlines. Yesterday morning, our time, he gave a speech at a genocide memorial site, basically confirming, not apologizing, but confirming deep responsibility on the part of the French government, specifically under Francois Mitterrand, I believe, in the Rwandan genocide. That was yesterday. Germany's doing this today.
Why?
Why is it just a coincidence? I would assume not.
That is interesting. Why? I'm not quite sure. I mean, are you thinking this notion of, okay, China's committing genocide, okay, we're going to commit to our sins in the
that's
past,
interesting. I wasn't even going. I was just posing the question. That's an interesting take on it. It could just be that Germany saw what France was doing and they decided to respond. Except, of course, it's a day later. That's really a fast response. I doubt that it would have been coordinated, or it could just be independently. But it's just an interesting timing thing, you know.
That these guys are both coming out and basically saying the exact same.
I wanted to, can we come back to Amazon, because we quickly moved to John Cena in China and this whole thing.
Go for it.
But with Amazon, DC's district attorney suing them, saying that they drive up prices. But isn't Amazon, didn't it get its monopoly by being like by far the cheapest online retailer?
Yes.
By like making not everything just super convenient, fast deliveries, it's all on one site.
Putting other people out of business.
But super cheap.
Being so cheap.
Yes, the Walmart of online retailers.
Right.
And that's why we compare it with Walmart and eBay. Well, Walmart is, compared to Amazon, not doing all that well, you know?
Yeah. They're getting, I mean, they couldn't
at least in the online stuff.
I mean, because think of what's happened. COVID hit. And then Amazon, fastest thing moving, their infrastructure is already in place. This is what they do.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, well, I don't want to go to the store. I don't want to go out the house. I don't want to do this. And so it's, all right, Amazon. Everybody's calling Amazon. Everybody is at the exact same time using Amazon. So much so Amazon was like, okay, we can't get delivered to everybody. I was fascinated by this because this is the kind of the sociological hard problem on some level. You have a bunch of resources. You have people who need those resources. How do you allocate them fairly? Or how do you allocate them at all? The COVID one was far more interesting to me because it's like you have a product and people need that product. And there's a limited amount of that product. How do you distribute the product? Now, we hit that problem every day in society. We use money as being this kind of intermediary where we can kind of make it anonymous of sorts in the way the solution to the problem works out, where some people are just living on the street, other people, etc. But with the vaccines, it's weirder because you can't ignore that. Like, you know that there are people in other countries that are dying for vaccines. So how do you just kind of make it anonymous with money when you know that those vaccines are being populated in certain places and there are certain people that get access to them before others? It gets very strange in the way that the way that stuff works out. But let's do the Amazon thing. Go for your thing.
Well, just briefly, and also our producer in the studio, Austin, bringing up this idea that does reflect with things that I've heard in the past, but it would be good to have an economics of Amazon type person come on to talk about their business structure, how they fit into the marketplace, what they do that other companies didn't and or don't.
But they were the fastest thing moving.
But the producer's saying they signed contracts with third parties that forced them to sell their product the cheapest on Amazon, and Amazon will as the right to retaliate.
Also,
what'd you say?
Well, they replicate some of the products also. They front the product sometimes, but
with what are Amazon's own sort of manufactured line of products, like Amazon Choice or whatever, which I'm guessing is their licensing out a product from another it's not like they have their own manufacturing centers. They've chosen this product to be their version.
The problem is they know about the product because they're working with a vendor.
Well, yeah, and that's why
they're working with a person.
Ubiquitous.
Yeah,
it's interesting how they started.
They should not be allowed to do that. Like, that's astonishing that they're allowed to do that.
My point to coming back wasn't just to poetic or rhapsodic or whatever. Wasn't to wax on about Amazon and their business structure. What I wanted to say was the weird irony or the weird contradiction where the district attorney for DC is coming after them for artificially inflated prices, but that doesn't make any damn sense or jive with what I understand about Amazon or what anybody understands about it. They have super cheap prices. The argument that I would make is that they drive out other business,
right? And
that you want a thriving, diverse,
basically antitrust
ecosystem. Yeah, that kind of argument. Yeah. Anyway, the argument didn't make sense. We need to go into a break.
Yeah.
But so much to talk about this morning.
Yes.
So many headlines. Interesting day. We need to go into a break. We'll be back in a minute with Ted Rall. And you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So recently, there is a very weird attack on the one and only Aaron Maté. And that attack basically ended up with the situation where TYT, basically a progressive news outlet, who call themselves Home of the Left, they, at the end of one of their videos, go into this back and forth where Anna insists that Aaron Maté is basically paid by the Russian government. Let's play the video. There's a bad word here that Anna is being saying bad things. But let's play the clip.
They said Aaron Mate yelled at me. And so
Aaron Mate lied. Aaron Mate. Everyone cares what Aaron Mate has to say, right?
Okay.
The guy who denies that Syrian children were killed with chemical attacks. Yeah. I can't.
Okay, see, that's what happened.
I can't stand that guy, and I can't stand the very intentional disinformation they put out there in regard to disgusting dictators around the world. The very people they seem to be working for, to be quite honest with you. Let's move on.
All right, we're done.
Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting.
Absolutely disgusting. Now, Madeleine Albright, who basically, when asked, hey, 500,000 kids died, babies died, asphyxiated of various diseases, their little bodies contorted because they didn't have the certain drugs because of the sanctions that you put into play. Do you believe it's worth it? And she says, yes. I think 500 children dying for my political ambitions is entirely worth it. Anna Kasparian loves her, has no issue with her at all. But Aaron Mate, and what she's talking about, Aaron Mate is pushed back on this notion of the OPCW, making the point that the OPCW, which is supposed to be an independent political institution, was basically used in order to co-sign what was a war crime, an attack on a foreign government, using dodgy evidence, with the individuals that were involved in the actual process saying the report was changed, the report was manicured to conform to a particular narrative. Even Bustani came out, meaning the guy who used to be the former director came out saying, yes, the leaks are right. Yes, the leaks are right. And yet, mainstream media has avoided this. TYT is basically, that's what she's talking about. That's what she's talking about. There's just to be specific. Nobody pays Aaron Mate. He's independent. He works for the Gray Zone. He used to work for Real News Network. And I will greatly like to know where those came from. And more importantly, before I get to the guests, just the very act of saying something is, oh, that guy's paid for by dictators. And that in and of itself becomes this kind of weird touchstone that liberals can basically do on a whim in order to say, this person is canceled. There's something problematic about that. In order to have a conversation about it, we're joined with Ted Rall. Ted Rall is a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. Ted, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So she later on, she comes out and makes a point of saying, well, he said that he was paid for by these governments. This is nonsense. He's never said that. And I guess the problem or my issue with this has to do with the way that they can use that as a discrediting thing in and of itself. Like it's almost like code. It's shorthand. It's to say this person is canceled from our standpoint or from our point of the crowd. And Aaron Mate has been independent and he's done phenomenal work. The man has been to the UN giving testimony on this stuff. He knows what he's talking about. He's an award-winning journalist. What are your thoughts, Ted?
Well, the left eats its own, right? We see this over and over, and it's interesting. There's a certain kind of song and dance that I'm used to, having traveled within what is sort of the really existing progressive left in the U.S. for several decades, and it's just like there's so many thin gradations of what is considered ideologically permissible within each individual space that it's hard to even figure out how you would be able to conform. I mean, there's been, for example, I always wondered why I was never mentioned or invited onto Democracy Now! I've had books out since 1992. I've put out thousands of left-wing editorial cartoons and columns over the years. It just seems like a natural, that I would end up being interviewed for one of my 22 books by Amy Goodman. And I don't really know the answer. All I can do is speculate. I know other people on the left who feel that they've been similarly treated or just sort of snubbed there. And then at the same time, I can get onto NPR Marketplace. Right? I mean, why? I can be in the Wall Street Journal. Why? And it's almost like there's this sort of desire to define themselves against other people who are very, very close to them ideologically and in terms of ethics. And it's almost like they attack people like that more than they attack outsiders completely, like on the right. It's very strange.
And you could cast this as like regular house cleaning or something like that, figuratively, in terms of, a social group trying to make sure that you're all good to go, trying to keep out the enemies, that kind of thing. And maybe part of it comes from paranoia, from the sense that you have outside parties who will, relentlessly try to get involved in your groups in order to steer them from the outside. And those are valid concerns. But at the same time, at the end of the day, in the vast majority of cases, I can't help but feel that it comes down to identity. I can't help but feel that people get attached to being politically pure in a certain way. And then they, will sort of reflexively rebel against anybody who they perceive as being less pure than them. And we call this purity testing. And when we use those words to refer to it, we use them derogatorily. It is widely, seen as a bad thing. It's not a good thing that people do to other people or to themselves for that matter. And it keeps the movement back. And I'm not even saying this as a leftist, but I'm saying this as somebody who, looking at the left wing from the outside, and I empathize with parts of it, it seems like it is very damaging psychologically for people to go through that process and constantly worry, as I imagine they would, about what other people are going to think about them, say about them, do to them if they act out of whatever comfort zone the other person has. And it seems like it's gotten worse. And we were talking about Madeleine Albright. Am I wrong? This is a little bit before my time, but first ever Secretary of State.
Yep.
I would assume that mid-late 1990s, I believe it was 1997 when she entered power, she was celebrated, feted, touted as the first female Secretary of State, despite the fact that she probably didn't do a very good job as, setting an example as the first woman Secretary of State. And I don't, this ties into to wokeness, the culture wars, feminism, all the different ways in which this ties in, but specifically talking about the gradations of acceptable behavior like you were with the left. It's not even like there's an onion where there's one way to get better. It's more like there are local centers of power that compete over what it means to be in the left wing, which leaves the movement, the base, perpetually fractured. Ted, on Madeleine Albright or on the structure of these discontinuities, these disagreements in the power centers on the left, what's your take?
Well, first of all, Madeleine Albright was a terrible Secretary of State. Yes. In terms, I'm interested in the other question more. Sartre, I think, said it really well, better than anyone else, as he did a lot of other things, when he said, in terms of left-wing purity tests, it is impossible for anyone to be on the left to be pure ideologically or to be pure ethically until the revolution has arrived in some kind of idealized form. Until then, we're all functioning under regimes, economic systems, nation states, and so on that we wish were different, and social organizations that we wish were different.
It reminds me of Revelations. It sounds rather religious.
But it's true. I mean, it's like, for example, it's like capitalist. But, so does that mean I should tell my next publisher, hey, don't pay me in advance? That's cool. No, because I live under capitalism and I need
to be
money
about
to
it,
pay
Ted.
bills.
You got to be about it if you believe it. You got to be. I love that. So there is I think it was a tweet that came out from The Hill, and basically is making the point that said Bernie Sanders, when he was going about his way during the campaign, he liked king-size beds and he liked his rooms to be cool. That's a headline. That's a story. Now think about that. Somebody sat there and wrote, Bernie Sanders, a human being, likes a king-size bed and he likes the rooms to be cool. What is the insinuation? Is it that socialists aren't supposed to like king-size beds?
I think it's an advertisement. If anybody wants to sleep with him, this is what you got. This is what you got going on if you get with Sanders.
I don't. Look, I like king-size beds. I like my room to be cool. I don't know what they're getting at. It sounds like, honestly, that they're poking at this notion of socialists are supposed to have like twin beds or something weird. Like it's just a very bizarre thing that they're putting out here on that. So yeah, I get it, Ted. It's like just because you're in something, the prevailing narrative is still going to assert itself. So
and by the way, by the way, that whole Bernie Sanders, who is he to want a big comfy bed? It doesn't cut the other way. By the way, for example, when the Taliban were overthrown in 2001, when U.S. troops broke into Mullah Omar's home, they found that he had been living as an S-seat, sleeping on a bare army cot, had basically no money. They never discovered a single foreign account. There was no corruption at all. He slept hard, lived hard. Was there a big article in the New York Times that said, wow, Mullah Omar really walked the walk? No one really cared. It never cuts. It always cuts against you.
Well, is there like a tally keeping agency or something? Part of the thing with Sanders, this is one of his lesser known policy points, but when he wanted to enter office, one of his plans was, okay, every American now must sleep in a twin-size bed. In Bernie's America.
Oh, that's what it is. They're calling him a hypocrite. That's what it is.
Exactly. Yeah, you guys might not have seen that because you're not left-wing enough. But I did. Anyway, Ted, I prefer Queens myself, but the purity testing, which is exactly what we're talking about. What's weird to me is that it's not coming from the left in this case. The Hill, I don't think of as a left-wing media outlet. They're pitching in too, but they're putting the mirror. I don't even know.
They're putting a knife in them.
They're putting a knife in them.
Yeah, they're putting a knife in them.
They're doing that for a right-wing audience that will make fun of Bernie Sanders because those are the arguments that they would expect.
right.
From the left wing.
Bernie Sanders has 3 homes.
Well, but
I can't believe he has 3 homes.
There's
He's
plenty
a
of
socialist.
pushback on Sanders for that from the left. I guess my point is the right is reflexively mirroring the left's supposed criticism, some of the left's criticism of Bernie. Am I wrong here? Aren't they? Do you see what I'm saying, Ted? They're kind of using the left wing's arguments against Sanders in this case in their weird right wing satirical way. I don't know. Am I right there? Or am I wrong?
No, you're totally right. And when I was, I'm older than you guys. When I was a kid in the 70s, the word was limousine liberal, used to attack rich Democrats like Ted Kennedy. And I remember just thinking actually, someone who is rich stands to lose a lot more from liberal policies than someone who is poor. So, he's not a hypocrite. He's actually a person with integrity who's willing to give up something for what he believes in. But, that's not the spin. It's like, it's somehow hypocritical to have inherited personal wealth and then decide that there should be some income redistribution.
Or write a book and get money from a book and then say, hey, I got $2 million from this book. I'm going to buy a home with this. And they say, look at that hypocrite spending money on 4 rooms. How dare he? He can't get by with 2. He's supposed to be a socialist. So let's do this.
And never once have any of these guys, Sanders, Kennedy, or so on, ever said that no one should be rich or that no one should do well or that they're anti-capitalist. Never. I mean, I'm anti-capitalist, but it's like they never said anything like that.
Yeah, I hear you. I was trying to think of what I'm anti, and then I thought of Pasto, and I'm like,
I was thinking nothing. I don't think I'm anti anything. And yes, against capitalism, this is anti so strong.
But I'm definitely not
It feels
pro-capitalist.
like an identifier in a weird way, and I hate that. I don't want to be pinned down like that.
I hear you. Yeah, and that's the natural, trying to defy boxes. And we have a guest, Mark Frost, who I believe defines himself in our bio as a capitalist. I do not do that, to be clear. But anyway, that's not where I wanted to go, Ted. That was a brain fart, so to speak. But one last point here. We're talking about purity testing, and one of our headlines this morning, Patrisse Cullors, head of the BLM Foundation, stepping down from that organization. Now, this is not, as many might think, if they've been watching the news cycle on this is not due to the criticism of her for potentially repurposing donations to the Black Lives Matter Foundation for her own personal real estate purchases. This is instead her going to pursue other things. Her going to pursue a book deal, more, writing more books, and also some sort of TV development deal with, I believe it was Warner Brothers. But here's the thing. People write the Bernie Sanders article. The Hill writes the Bernie Sanders article. And people make fun of Bernie Sanders for having the mansions. Patrisse Cullors has mansions. Patrisse Cullors has bought a bunch of real estate. She's now going into a cush book deal. And she's going to be making a bunch of money, I'm sure, from the TV deal. And she is sort of exiting stage right, while the Black Lives Matter movement rages on, and I'm not trying to be derogatory towards it. A lot of the things that the Black Lives Matter, protest movement was protesting haven't been fundamentally resolved. But Patrice, one of the three founders of it, is now exiting to a cushy life, and yet I see no pushback from the left. Why is it that Sanders gets this kind of thing, but Cullors doesn't? Am I missing something, Ted?
Well, first of all, I don't think I don't know that I don't know who you guys talk to, but I personally haven't really heard a lot of actual leftists rag on Sanders over this stuff.
Okay.
At all. I think most people kind of know that he lives pretty modestly, and for a guy who's been around, who's really old and has been a U.S. senator for decades, he doesn't really have a lot of money at all. Considering his station in life. I mean, compare him to someone like Nancy Pelosi, who's worth $300 million.
Yeah.
But the thing about it's interesting. I did a deep dive into the Black Lives Matter thing. I was researching an article, and I think there is trouble there on the left in BLM as the foundation goes, in that there's really a lack of transparency.
Yes.
People don't know where the money goes. When well-meaning people send in a check to or PayPal over to BLM, they don't really know what happens to the cash. And even if you go to their website, there's no listing of who are the board members or whether they're being compensated at all. I mean, in my view, people who are on the board of an organization like that should not be paid at all, or even have their expenses compensated. I think it should be purely voluntary. And then, and their names should be known. But on the other hand, when I talked to them, they said, well, they pointed out these people get death threats. They're scared. They don't want their names in public. So, I mean, there's a good argument against it, but it does make me uncomfortable. And I think, we've sort of seen, like Occupy Wall Street had a lot of money coming in at one point too, and that money was at least transparent. The budgets were revealed.
Some of it, but I remember
public assemblies.
I remember from covering it, there were also people in Manhattan specifically staying in $1,000 a night hotels while the protests were going on, and while the sort of hoi polloi or whatever, the rank and file members of the protest, not saying it was a military movement, while they were protesting in the street, there were some people who were responsible for collecting the money who were living pretty well while it was going on. Now, I remember that happening with Occupy Wall Street. I don't know how representative that was of the movement as a whole, but the Black Lives Matter Foundation, part of what makes this that much trickier is that it is a foundation. It is responsible for taking in funds and then distributing those funds to this, at this point, vast network of other organizations, and you don't know how much is going to whom in those organizations, and you don't know exactly what they're doing with it. Anyway, we need to go into a break. We're going to be coming back talking about the budget, but I wanted to hit that with you, and that is valid, Ted. When I brought up the Sanders-Cullors comparison thing there, I've seen some people hitting Sanders on it, and the Hill article I think is suggestive, but you're right. I think I might have overstated it slightly when I asked the question. Anyway, we need to go into a break. We'll be back with Ted Rall in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and Ted Rall, our guest, syndicated columnist, political cartoonist. We'll be back with Ted on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So we are talking Joe Biden and the budget. And Joe Biden is proposing $6 trillion budget in the coming days. The New York Times was reported early Thursday about a third higher than pre-pandemic spending levels. This is The Hill. Quote, the proposal will contain major investments in infrastructure, education, healthcare, according to the Times, and bring federal spending levels to their highest sustained levels since World War II. Under the plan, documents for which were obtained by the Times, the federal government will spend $6 trillion in the 2022 fiscal year, and spending would increase to $8.2 trillion by 2031. Here's the thing. How do you get it passed? And not just how do you get it passed, all of this talk about Joe Biden being FDR, that experiment is over. That ship has sailed. If he is not willing to even go to length of getting $15 an hour pass, don't tell me. FDR, don't say his name. Don't whisper it at all to me. What is interesting, though, is something that Shane and I mentioned the other day, this notion that there are no new ideas, that you have Democrats pretending to be FDR as they recognize the ground around them shifting and that something is wrong. Oh, my God, somebody attacked the Capitol. But you have Republicans going back to this kind of contract with America under like this Gingrich thing that took place in the 90s. The 90s thing was a failure. And from the standpoint of FDR, yes, but again, they're lying about it. Why aren't there any new ideas? And joining us to have this conversation, Ted Rawl. Ted, why are there no new ideas? Why are both of these guys in a situation where they don't seem to be able to come up with anything new? And it's not one side or the other. I get that if Joe Biden could wave a magic wand, and in the context of waving that magic wand, Joe Biden got his policies. He's like, no one has built America. Here's the PRO Act. Bam. If he could do that, would he do it? I don't even think he would do it. But let's say he could do it. I mean, that's at worst or at best going back to, let's say, FDR. That's still not necessarily new ideas. Those are the same ideas of them going back to the future. I mean, it's a very weird situation. Why are there no new ideas?
Well, there's new tactics. There's a new tactic on the part of the Democrats, which I wrote about and I think we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where, as you alluded to just now, Biden and the Democrats do something that Obama and Bill Clinton did not do. They proposed progressive ideas, progressive legislation, but they do so in a half-hearted, weak-kneed kind of way, so that they can say, "Look, we paid lip service to these ideas, we proposed it, and the mean Republicans shot it down." I think they would be really depressed if the Republicans, woke up one day and gave them what they wanted. They don't want that. They're taking it. They're assessing the situation. They know that they have McConnell and all the rest of the gang solidly lined up against anything they propose. So therefore, they say, okay, well, there's no loss for us to our wealthy corporate donors. We can just tell them that we're proposing this stuff for domestic consumption, for our party's consumption. We have this progressive base to deal with, but we don't have to worry about it actually passing. Just let us go through the motions. And you can see they're going through the motions because Biden is not using the bully pulpit. They're not twisting arms. They're not doing LBJ and FDR style tactics in order to force through stuff that they want. They're not.
Speaking about that, this kind of shuck and jive politics of the 90s, where Joe Biden can, have these guys there with their cigar. They're probably, they're looking at their secretary out there and they're saying, come on, let's, deal with me on this. And then Joe Biden gets the votes in. That's not where we are. And I don't know if Joe Biden knows that. We have a clip. Let's play the clip. Andre, if you have this Joe Biden clip, I think we've had it queued for a while.
Even my Republican friends in Congress, not a single one of them voted for the rescue plan. I'm not going to embarrass any one of them, but I have here a list of how back in their districts they're bragging about the rescue plan. They touted the restaurant revitalization fund. They touted the fact that we're in a situation where they're dealing with touted grants to community health care centers. Some people have no shame. But I'm happy. I'm happy they know that it benefited their constituents. That's okay with me. But if you're going to try to take credit for what you've done, don't get in the way of what we still need to do.
That is not. I get what he's trying to do. He's trying to appeal to shame. There has to be some levels of shame that will be enough for Republicans to say, okay. There are none. We're not there anymore. I mean, we're at the point where these guys are basically saying Joe Biden's election is fraudulent, that he is not even the real president of the United States. I mean, they're on this mindset of a repudiation of government in and of itself in regards to, at the very least, if Joe Biden is at the helm of it. This doesn't fly. He's like, that's what I mean, right? It's like, it doesn't seem like this tactic that Obama did. Look, I would say that the fact that Donald Trump ended up being president means it failed on some level if existence was part and parcel to your job as a political leader. And so it's like, all right, what is Biden doing? Biden isn't doing anything. So like, that's kind of what I'm getting to. It's like, what is this? There is no new politics. And I don't mean new politics in a sense like some kind of radical transhumanism, we're all robots. I don't even mean that. I mean basic stuff that can get done and that the person actually believes in. And I don't see that on either side. And that's terrifying going into the midterms because there is energy on the other side for this, especially in what they're lining up against. Does the Republican Party and the way they're lining up concern you on this?
You're right. The energy is on the other side. Look, the Democratic Party has studiously avoided and purged anybody with new ideas through the primary process and the superdelegates and also a variety of electoral shenanigans going back to, Ted Kennedy in 1980 and, Howard Dean and obviously Bernie Sanders, not once but twice. It goes on. So whenever there's a progressive out there, they take pains to destroy them. So that's where the new ideas would come from. I mean, look, we literally have the oldest, president in history right now serving in office. And it's not just that he's old. He also came out of the total establishment wing of the Democratic Party. I mean, this was a guy who was opposed to court-ordered busing. And, I was a kid when that happened. And let me just say, if you were on the wrong side of that issue at that time, everyone knew you were wrong at that time.
Look, Biden was arguing states' rights. If you remember, when Kamala Harris brought that up, he got Kamala Harris was, look, whatever you want to think about Kamala Harris, as a debater, she nailed him on that. And what I mean by that, like planted, like waited, like laid and went, just waited for a shot. And it's like, I'm on stage, I'm up, bam. And it was one of those things where Joe Biden was like bewildered and ends up arguing states' rights. And I'm sitting there like, whoa, I think my wife was with me. I was like, he's arguing states' rights. I was like, what is going on here? Like, so, yeah, I mean, like that was very weird. I mean, that Joe Biden was on the wrong, fighting for that. But yeah, I mean, it didn't seem to matter. That's where that's who they chose.
And the thing about Trump is, and his people, they do have ideas that they actually really do believe in and that are novel within the Republican Party, and in some ways novel within both parties. I mean, for example, Trump's skepticism of interventionism, not complete, opposition to it, but sort of a scaled back outward projection of military power by the U.S. That's new.
That's not new.
We haven't seen that.
That's new. It's just it's been a long time since we've seen it.
Yeah,
it's been like a century since we've seen it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there was Pat Buchanan was sitting in the wings, with this same exact isolationist approach. But I mean, the point is that it came to a fore, and he made it popular.
Yeah,
he argued for it and won a series of Republican primaries, arguing that within arguing against conventional Republican politicians, he won. So
he did, and I think the last time you saw that take the fore, it was about a century ago when you had all these debates and leading up to World War I and of course World War II about whether or not the United States should get involved, and that the debate over isolationism, and then we got involved and we were the sole superpower remaining. We took up the baton along with the uniform for becoming the police officer of the world, and at this point, I think the major difference now is if there's a world war, it's not going to be between other parties. It's going to involve us directly. And therefore, we will no longer, the interventionism isn't going to be paternalistic. It's not going to be out of the sense that we need to get involved, out of a sense of social or political responsibility, geopolitical responsibility. It's going to involve us. And therefore, the debate about whether or not we should get involved, it's going to take up an entirely different tenor, because it would be us as one of the combatants is my best guess. Now, I don't know. That would be the debate on the high levels. Very likely, if we saw another world war, it would probably be triggered by one of these proxy wars. And so we could still use that for a little while, but I think it would be clear. It's not like we would be the Great Britain in World War II or something like that. That's how we'd paint ourselves, or we'd be the Nazis. I hope we don't become that. Anyway, different sides of this. I wanted to come back to something, which is the leakiness of the Biden administration. For a while there, if you were on the left, or hey, even on the right, during the Trump term, it was like manna from heaven.
Lovely.
All of the leaks falling from the leakiest sieves, the leakiest of all sieves, which was the Trump administration, because you had a bunch of Quizlings or something like this who were, part of the intel community, constantly leaking to the press. It was fun, admittedly. It has been radio silence from inside the Biden administration. And this comes despite the fact, or maybe because of the fact, that Trump, notoriously open-minded, open Twitter platform, constantly talking personally about what his intentions were, whether you believed him is another thing, but still, Biden doesn't really have that in comparison, and yet I hear nothing. And so the person about whom I'm most curious, Biden specifically, what's going on in his mind, in the minds of his cronies, associates, assistants, advisors, etc. What are they planning here? What do they want to do? I don't even, dirt would be great, but just some insight would be useful. Why are we not hearing anything from the Biden administration, Ted?
2 words, Barack Obama. This was, you remember, no drama Obama.
Yeah.
Obama famously kept a leak-free White House, and the Biden administration is staffed with the very same people. So that's why, this is the third term of Barack Obama in terms of policy. The tactics are a little different, but in terms of the way they're running this White House and keeping everything tight, I think they're even more strongly motivated to do so because, look, they're all kind of hiding a big open secret, which is that the president isn't really ruling the country. So
it's not altogether
not the
there.
way that we think.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be altogether there. Like, if he really wanted to be, let's say, the aggressive person that people claim that he was, could he do it? And I don't think so. I mean, he's just a fundamentally different person than the person that he was before. And then you get to the thing of Kamala Harris. I mean, it's very weird that they call themselves FDR when you have this thing where FDR was continuously with the public and engaged with the public. And Joe Biden has just been puff of smoke. Puff of smoke. My concern over this is the midterms. That's my concern. So Biden puts out his budget. Republicans put out a counter offer, let's say for the infrastructure plan. It's like $1 trillion. Far less. These guys are far apart. And Republicans would say, okay, we're going to negotiate. If you want to be bipartisan fair, we're going to negotiate with you for years. Years. We will sit in this room and we will talk to you for years. And when nothing happens, when your big plans, big agenda, all of the things that you said you were going to do as president came to a grinding halt, it will be your fault. And they would be right in that assessment. Their job as a Republican Party is to do just that. Whatever people want to think of the 1%, they deserve their representation like anybody else, I suppose, in a particular system. And in this case, well, they got their guy, Republicans. And let's be honest, the majority of the Democrats. But I'm just, in this very specific case, from the standpoint of opposition, they're doing their job. And in doing their job, Joe Biden, if he has the power to get something done, he should have did it. So it's like Democrats are going to blame, the Republicans kept holding us back. But how can you claim that in this situation? Joe Biden, yes, 51 votes. And yes, it would take torching the filibuster to do it, or going through the successive reconciliation bills. But he has the power to do it. He doesn't do it. And Ted, the big one, the voting rights legislation bill. How do you not do that? Republicans in all of these states, they have hundreds of bills that are going out restricting voting rights. How do you, as the Democratic Party, not move heaven and earth to pass that bill? From a political standpoint, that seems to be existential. And yet, puff of smoke. What is going on? Like, it doesn't seem to be anybody running the ship. And these guys aren't coming up to midterms. And if they lose, Either the House or the Senate. Agenda's over. Agenda's over. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree. There was never going to be as much political capital for this president, or really for any president, as when he first took office.
Yes.
And it shouldn't have been the first 100 days. It should have been the first 10 hours.
Yes.
Like it should have been a blizzard of legislation and policy changes and executive orders that came out fast and furious because they were never going to get that shot again. When next year, when Americans are voting in the midterms, I mean, of course, obviously, all elections are local, and people are really considering, there's going to be huge advantages to incumbency. But I think people will first and foremost be looking at their own personal economic and health situation. If the COVID variants haven't come back with a vengeance, if people are feeling like they can walk around outside without a mask, if people are back to work, I think that's going to help Biden enormously, even if he doesn't get a substantial infrastructure bill passed. But then if the Republicans succeed in nationalizing the election and pointing out a lack of accomplishment, it doesn't take much even to wiggle loose, 3, 4, 5 seats here and there that are going to make all the difference in the world. So it's true that there's not really, any place for the Biden administration to function that's outside of, that's sort of within the constructs of, hey, we put something up for a vote and we see how it goes. That's just not going to play. They're going to have to come up with, if they want to have something to brag about next year, they're going to have to do something different. They're going to have to find a wedge issue that Republicans can't say no to. They're going to have to get Republicans on the record voting against stuff that's really popular. And I don't see any sign of that. I mean, as it is, clearly $15 an hour minimum wage is like forgotten. And we haven't talked about this, but Biden has said now he's welched on the public option that he promised to the ACA, even though it's popular. 68% of Americans want it. I think the healthcare is still a major disaster in this country, and so lack of accomplishment is not going to be helpful.
Now, Ted, Biden administration, they employ you for a second. They give you millions of dollars of money, and I know you have enough internal conscience to be able to bite the hand that feeds you, but nevertheless, they put you to task. They ask you to come up with what those wedge issues are. Now, you just named one of them, $15 minimum wage. What else do you come up with? What do you think would be a good idea for them to push, Ted?
Well, I would say it's time to revisit Medicare for all because it's super popular. I think student loan forgiveness is a good wedge issue because it's not just for young people. Most people who pay college tuition are parents, so I would revisit those platforms. I would also work hard on the international front. Bring in some of America's longstanding diplomatic problems in for a landing. I mean, a summit with Iran, for example. Full normalization of relations with Cuba, trying to accomplish something with Putin at the upcoming summit. All of those things would help.
That's what I mean. You need an animal for that. Like we were having this conversation earlier about a left-wing Newt Gingrich, and one that could win, not one like the real, the fate, the current one of Newt Gingrich, the disgraced Newt Gingrich. That one had to step down because of extramarital affairs and whatnot and corruption. So no, not that one, but one that is aggressive, one that is pushed for their particular agenda. What do you think about that? We have about 30 seconds before we have to close.
Yeah, well, Democrats have, and in my memory, have never nationalized a midterm election. And they would need, basically what their approach, as you said, has been to blame the mean Republicans. Look, that works to try to sate your progressive base. That certainly worked for Obama to say, look, we couldn't do anything because the Republicans stopped us. But it does not get you swing votes. It does not get you crossover Republican votes. It doesn't get you, it doesn't grow your base. It just tries to keep your restive people in.
No, totally. I understand. It's like a race to the bottom of sorts. I'm just maintaining. It's a default. Ted, thank you for joining us, man. The voice that you guys were listening to is Ted Rawl, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. You can find him on Twitter at Ted Rawl and read his cartoons at rawl.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition, well, really the last hour this morning of this edition of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning again, Washington, D.C., Kansas City, and the rest of the wider world. One quick note before I get into headlines, we are not going to be airing on Monday. It's Memorial Day. Happy Memorial Day weekend. Folks are going into it now. We'll be back on Tuesday, 7 a.m. Eastern. Just want to let you know, don't feel forlorn when you don't hear us on Monday. It's a holiday. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the news. In COVID news, first up, more than 27,600 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with about 1,339 new deaths. That's due to Maryland adding many new uncollated deaths yesterday. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 23,000 cases per day. That's a decrease of 35% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 40% of the American public has been fully vaccinated. 50% of people in other key areas for another 3 weeks. This as hospitals in those areas remain too full. The extension here puts just barely a month before the country is due to host the Summer Olympics, which have received pushback from the Japanese public over concerns of coronavirus proliferation. Senate Republicans yesterday unveiled their latest response to the Biden administration's infrastructure plan. The Republicans' plan totals about a bit under $1 trillion, about $930 billion, and we'll see the response back to that. Patrisse Cullors, one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, is stepping down from her leadership position with the Black Lives Matter Foundation. With today as her last day, she rejected that her movement is her move is in response to recent allegations that she had used donations to the Black Lives Matter Foundation to fund personal real estate purchases. She says that she will instead be working on the upcoming release of her second book and a multi-year TV development. Those are Monifa Bandele, a BLM organizer and founder of the Malcolm X grassroots movement in New York City, and Makani Themba, an early backer of the BLM movement, and reserve banks, those in Atlanta, Boston, and Minneapolis, have recently dedicated resources to social policy. This is coming with some criticism from Senator Pat Toomey, a Republican from Pennsylvania, because of the nature of the policy. They've spearheaded a series of events that was participated in by all 12 regional federal banks, basically on racism as the foundational cause of inequality in our country. Now, I definitely want to come back to this in a couple of minutes, but 3 Federal Reserve banks spearheading this process and getting criticism for it, moving to wokeness. The Fed goes woke is one way of putting this. In other political news nationally here, what would have been the headline event at next week's centennial remembrance of the Tulsa Race Massacre has been canceled due to unexpected circumstances with entertainers and speakers, quote unquote. The Tulsa Race Massacre was an event 100 years ago, 1921, an event where after I started hosting the show, I got somebody messaging me being like, dude, way less people are killed than you're saying. I say 300 people were killed. That's what I see all over the place. And then this person texts me saying 2 to 3 dozen were actually killed, and a lot of apparently scholarly debate over it. I don't know. I literally haven't had enough time to research it, so I'm just saying the 300 were killed from what I've seen. I've also heard that far less were killed, so look into it yourself. I still need to resolve this for myself. Anyway, hundreds of others were injured, and what seems to have been the case is, I don't see people disputing this, 30 blocks of black-owned businesses were burned. What was known as Black Wall Street was effectively destroyed. This has become a big event in race relations in relatively recent history in the United States. Anyway, in international political news, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko are meeting in Sochi today, Sochi, Russia, following heightened tensions between Belarus, Russia, and the EU over the Belarusian hijacking of a Ryanair plane. It was reportedly in order to prevent a nuclear threat, but evidently in order to detain 2 political dissidents aboard that plane. Since that move, which has been universally condemned in the Western press, Russia has turned away several European flights who avoided Belarusian airspace and sought to use Russian airspace instead. And again, Lukashenko and Putin are meeting today. We will see where that crisis goes. Hopefully it resolves soon. Germany has for the first time recognized that its colonial troops committed genocide against the Herero and Nama tribespeople in the early 20th century. The German government will give a cash payment of 1.1 billion euros to the descendants of the victims, as well as to the government of Namibia, the country now sited on the territories where those tribes once lived, and still live in some forms, I'm guessing, although they were the victims of genocide. Earth and Science. In Earth and Science news, Sri Lankan service personnel have been deployed to clean up millions of particles of microplastics mixed with oil that were spewed by a chemical container ship that caught fire and has now been burning for a week. Hazardous material on board. That ship is flagged. It's a Singapore flagged ship, and it's currently anchored off the coast of Sri Lanka's capital. In business news, Washington, D.C.'s District Attorney Carl Racine filed suit against Amazon for, quote, unfairly inflating prices and abusing its monopoly, end quote. Amazon currently holds between 50 and 70% of the market for online retailers. For comparison, the next 2 largest competitors, those are Walmart and eBay, both only have 5%. Amazon disputes these claims and stated that if Attorney Racine wins his pursuit, they will be forced to raise prices on deliveries for consumers. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Now, one of the big... I want to come back to the Fed regional bank thing, which I added in this last batch of headlines because I saw it come up. One of the big criticisms from the left of the whole wokeness thing is that, it shifts the focus in an unhelpful way from class to race.
Yes.
That is, as far as I can tell, the leading criticism of wokeness on the left. And there are others, that quote-unquote political correctness is sort of damaging. There are these other things that have other roots, but that's a big one. Anyway, I think this is adding pretty strong evidence to that. I'll put it like this. You have 3 out of the 12 regional banks, Federal Reserve banks, coming out and spearheading these series that all of the banks are going to have to go through, that have been going through, talking about how racism is foundational to our society and is specifically, foundational to the inequality in our society. These are banks we're talking about. This is the Federal Reserve we're talking about. And they're talking about inequality. And instead of pinning it on their bad decisions over the years or, whatever they'd pin it on, there are plenty of things you could pin it on. They're pinning it on racism, a somewhat ineffable, albeit real, phenomenon in our society.
Ambiguous.
But is that really the cause of inequality? Or is that in its own way, one of the effects of inequality.
Yeah. It's very weird. It's very weird. Like, it's, yeah. I mean, that is the criticism of wokeness, right? It's like you guys are basically using race as a dodge for things that are based on class. And it's not, an individual's black skin or white skin that is inherently X or Y. It's a social system that these guys are living in that is partitioning advantages for one as opposed to the other. I don't need your wokeness. I don't need your wokeness. This is environmental in the way that I look at it. Now, you would have a lot of people who are on this network that would disagree with me. They would say this is race and that race is paramount in this. And on some level, those people are right. If I'm getting, a doctor's giving me less pain medication, well, that's not me, that's not a money thing. That's a individual, that gets into the kind of societal thing. Or if a person with a black hand and you decide, I don't want to buy that product because that product has a black hand as opposed to the white. That stuff, I can't necessarily deal with that stuff. That stuff is fudgy to me. What I can deal with are the issues of class. And what that means is, hey, maybe if that neighborhood wasn't in disrepute, maybe the crime rate wouldn't be what it is. How about that? Let's start there. Now, what they want, honestly, what all of them want, what all of the political leaders want, this is what they want, basically. They say inequality is bad. This is not good for us. And we need to find a way to get rid of inequality while us maintaining our ends. Meaning we want the world to stay as the world is, but we need the world to change. That's what we need. So yes, we're going to talk about wokeness. We're going to say, I am now in the CIA and I'm a female and I'm a black woman or something like that. They can do that. They'll make that video now. As if that in and of itself somehow makes up for the material reality of things. What people are complaining about, what people need are the material reality of those things. And some of that stuff, people have been against me when I made the point about, when Sanders was running, it was better for Sanders to run and push his agenda as opposed to supporting reparations. Never get it passed. And my argument for it was, the moment that you try, you're going to have people screaming to high heaven, what about me? Or I don't like it. They're going to be very vengeful and angry. And what happened? You had that modest plan of Joe Biden saying, okay, we're going to prioritize the African-American groups. Now, I can go back and make the point about all of these years where that group was disparaged and it didn't matter when I owed it. That guy was like, hey, what about me? My retail business has been hurt. And he's right. His retail business was hurt. But I'm making the point that he still did it and it happened. It was, of course, going to happen. And so the idea that if I have somebody running who says Medicare for all, and I know it's a flat fact that 30-something million people have been affected with COVID, those people are going to have medical bills, and a large share of those are going to be disproportionately African-American or whatever else. If the king of blacks, Joe Biden, is going to be running in this particular thing, and he's going to say that, then Medicare for all directly affects that population in a disproportionate fashion. Does it have to be specific to the race? No. For it to have a large impact. So there are policies that you can go that level some of this stuff out. They don't even do that. Like, our political space has got very aggravating in this kind of breaking of need and reality to this kind of theatrics. And I get the theatrics. Look, the theatrics were there before, where it was like, hey, no, we're not going to get a policy that helps you and your people. No. However, we will put this black person into that position. Aren't you happy with that? And in the 60s, people were like, yeah, all right, fair enough. They'll accept that, right? That's a win. What about today? Does that theatrics work? Yes. Kamala Harris. And what do you say? Collaborate. Hey, they'll be happy with Kamala Harris. That's what they'll be happy with. They don't need that Medicare for all. I mean, it's like nonsense. But the wokeness, that's the critique of wokeness, that it allows the party to basically cloak itself. We are the defenders of blackness, or we are the defenders of gays, or we are the defenders of whatever group that they're going to have, the subgroup that they're going to carve up. And then in being the defender of that, if you say anything about that, it's like you're attacking those groups. Like, it's very, it's visceral, right? If somebody feels like they're defending my race, they're defending my sex, they're defending it's a very visceral thing. And you make the point, it's like, but what if the issue is class in the things that you guys are talking about? And I get your race and everything else is important to you, and your identities are very important to you. Fair enough. All sorts of social constructs are very important to people. However, if you're getting to the real material things, what real people care about, not the activists, the physical world things. And those are the things that they ignore for this notion of dancing around and wearing, kente cloth and kneeling and whatnot.
It's true, and it's a valid pushback. Yeah, the left-wing pushback against it, it has its own weight. The right-wing pushback, in my opinion, has weight too. The argument about political correctness, specifically,
that's annoying. You're right.
Wokeism turning into cancel culture. It's not just annoying.
You can't
in my
say
opinion.
that.
That's deleterious on a real deep level.
Yeah.
What I don't hear people bringing up enough, and what's my personal, this is my bone with it, honestly, is that it's not good for the human spirit. I don't know how else to say this.
The human spirit.
Yes.
Something Marianne Williamson about that. I like it.
Taking this stuff too seriously, taking the idea that politics, which is important, should be the basis of your ethics and your social relations, is dehumanizing not just to yourself, but to your close friendships, your family, your relationships with other human beings on the deepest levels. What it says is your stated ethical beliefs are and should be the foundation of your respectability in society. What that leads to, from a sort of incentive sense, is people to misstate their ethical beliefs up the wazoo all over the time for local positional gains, because it makes them look good. And if we value people on what they say, and for saying things with the whole purity testing thing, whatever, if it makes you look good, then you're going to lie about it. And you're going to lie about it to yourself to be consistent. And then you're going to be living in a fake manufactured reality of your own creation, where you relate to other people not as a genuine human being, but as a political ethical object for you to evaluate your own usefulness to yourself. And that is degrading to the human spirit. That is very deeply damaging. I don't want to see myself as part of this vanguard of ethical revolution and ethical progress. I want to see myself as a rich human being with problems and needs and relationships. And I want to see other people, more importantly, as rich human beings who don't exist as some exponent of ethical progress on this larger scale, and who I don't judge merely for their stated ethical beliefs, but who I love and judge more deeply for who they are as a person in all of their richness and complexity. And I'm done waxing poetic about this now, but it's true. That's my problem with that. And I think people leave that out. It's important.
Yeah, I feel you. I guess my thought is, on some level, that's your society, regardless. Anywhere you are is where you're at. The only question becomes is how extreme or how minimal. Because there's some things.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, think about for the moment, what we allow. So let's say you're in the 60s and 50s. You can call somebody and get away with it. Within the context of your, political, discretion and subjectivity, that's allowed. And you can get white person, say it. People are like, okay, I don't like him saying that. Okay, how I go, yes, sir, walk away. And now you go, to the 80s, that is no longer allowed. That is no longer permissible. In fact, not even permissible in regards to Republicans. Everybody in the room could be like, that guy's right. Nobody would say that guy's right because of the the pressure gradient in society has basically changed.
The hermetic seal around those beliefs, that kind of thing.
It's like your society changes on some level. And you get to the day where it moves so far that you have this kind of wokeness stuff that is a relic of that never kind of organized itself right, but instead became, all right, instead of dealing with class, which is what we should be dealing with, let's take this off into infinity and beyond of wokeness. And so, now you have the CIA, which castigated and went after the left for God knows how long, making woke videos.
Mm-hmm.
How wild is that? How wild is that?
It's delicious, Jamarl. It's just so good.
It's like, oh, these guys are our friends. These guys are our friends. It's very wild and weird to see that. And so, they've taken that, which started off as something, because what would King be? Think of the conversations that would have taken place back, let's say, the 60s. And you would have a radio station, same, everything else the same, 60s. They would say, well, people who are saying the N-word and everything else, it was like, they're being too hard on those guys. They're being too hard on those guys. And somebody else would say, well, no, I think that's wrong. They shouldn't be saying that. And what you would have is that this kind of change in your society as it takes place and changes. Yeah, it changes. There's a distinction. The catch becomes, how far does that go? It's like anything else. And does it get to the point where it stops, where people, all right, I'm not going to say bad things about you. You're not going to say bad things about me, to the point of saying, I don't even like you being able to say, like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan would say, hey, maybe we shouldn't have trans women fighting non-trans women.
Which means he's transphobic.
Which means immediately transphobic canceled. Now, is he transphobic for saying that? No, he's not transphobic for saying that. And yet, that's the way it would go. They would attack Joe Rogan for it. He would get castigated. He's cast out. You can't have the conversation. Like, that's astonishing stuff. But that's where it goes. That's where it goes. So it's not entirely about this notion of, like I said, this notion of identity is so tight. So it's like Democrats aren't stupid for taking that and using that. It's for that reason. It's closely held, especially when people feel like they've been marginalized in the society itself. There's this kind of dual consciousness where you don't know why people are behaving particular ways. And people get really caught up in that, especially activists.
It's a deep handle in your soul. And they got your ego by the throat when they do this identity stuff.
I love it.
Which means they can pull you into the ballot box. They can pull you over from one side to another. And the Republicans do it too.
They're going to put you in chains.
Yeah.
I gotta.
I guess that's what's sickening to me about this stuff. And again, I'm a older 20s, but a relatively young dude. I know, younger brother. I know plenty of people, to call them Gen Z broadly, growing up in a time where there's like this deep paranoia about what people are going to think of them for thinking or saying any random thing. And that is not good for the human being.
Yeah.
Full stop. We need to go into a break. That's my take. Be coming back with Margaret Kimberly. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, you can, whatever content, you can like and share this audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do a chat, a tweet, but of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. There was an interesting question that was asked. I believe it was either by The Economist and I believe even the New York Times about basically progress. 1 year, George Floyd. You had this event where a black man was basically murdered in broad daylight in front of a lot of people as he cried and wept for his life. And this took place for a gruesome, basically 9 minutes. And America sees it, and America is bothered by it. There's a lot of oddities with this. First, we're talking about black America and race relations in the context of an event that took place in criminal justice. That by itself seems a little bit weird and maybe is implicitly directs what we're talking about here. But I think the thing is, the poll that was tracking a lot of the attitudes that people were having, they felt basically like, yeah, I don't see much has changed. And the catch becomes, why did they think anything was going to change? What did they practically think was going to take place if nothing practically took place? That's the fascinating thing to me. I mean, when you look at just the things from the standpoint of lifespan, if you look at the way the people live in the various countries, the life expectancy, infant mortality, all of these things are dramatically different from the standpoint of African Americans. Murderers, prison population, these things are not positive things. The communities that the various people live in that may be in disrepute. If these things are not changed, why do we expect a different outcome? This is not entirely a criminal justice issue. The issue is poverty. To have a conversation about this, I was fascinated just by the conversation itself on it. We're joined with Margaret Kimberly. Margaret Kimberly is a senior columnist and editor for the Black Agenda Report and author of Prejudicial, Black America and the Presidents. You can follow Margaret on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog and find her work at blackagendareport.com. Margaret, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us again.
Thanks. It's nice to be back.
Absolutely. So what do you think about that? I mean, it's this idea that there was a scream for defund the police. Now, I often feel like I alienate people, or for that matter, being alienated for various things. I don't necessarily know why this quirk tends to continuously happen. It feels like a Larry David thing, but it happens. Like, we were in meeting the other day, and they were like, hey, what about this person? Can you get that person? Was like, oh, man, well, this happened with that person. Well, what about this person? Was like, well, that's a funny story with that person. It's like, dude, it looks like this happens a lot. And then when I get home, I had to contact somebody else, and it was like, oh, God, that's not going to happen. But on this very particular thing, my thing was, okay, the fund of police is askew. The issue is poverty. The fight, if you're going to have it, is on poverty. For all of the energy that was being used, like, if you think you had people in New Zealand marching, like Germany, all of these people around the world marching, oh, yes, George Floyd. They have no idea who they're talking about, right? But still out there marching. If you're going to use that much energy and you're going to devote it into criminal justice, and Democrats are going to say, okay, we're going to pass some legislation hitting cops. That's it. When really, cops are always used as the dodge. They're always used as a fireman. Okay, we're going to throw that in, as opposed to doing real, legitimate work at rooting out poverty and eliminating whatever the amount of crime that's associated with it. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, so it's like, to me, the 1 year thing, if you're not, it's like they're talking about criminal justice, but they're talking about race relations in the context of criminal justice when nothing real underlying has fundamentally changed. What are your thoughts?
Well, you make a good point. The issue is that we still have a system which is very much racist, especially towards black people, and that is why George Floyd is dead. We have a police, law enforcement system that is set up to, in particular, oppress black people, and as long as those things are true, you may have some change in the numbers of people killed by police, but you won't really. And the system is not held up by magic. It's held up by people. And there are many people who may have viewed that video with disgust who nonetheless don't want any change in the system. They want to have a system that protects them from black people, they think. So those, as long as those things are true, you are correct. I don't know what poverty has to do with George Floyd's case, actually, but
well, when I think of the George Floyd case, I often think about, okay, what areas are these things occurring in? Because it's not occurring in a vacuum. I mean, when I'm looking at, and I know there are a lot of people that disagree with me on this. They think the race thing is primary. No, I think the poverty thing is primary. I think in the various areas or in the various things, meaning, yes, I don't want cops murdering people. Not at all. But oftentimes those cops are predatory in various areas that are already in disrepute. And then those things are taken advantage of. And my thought is get rid of those areas. It's like, why allow, if we know as a flat fact that crime and poverty are interrelated with one another, and we do, the studies show it, then why not get rid of the primary aspect of poverty and then deal with the rest of the crime as it goes? I mean, I think it's going to have outgoing symptoms in regards to human development of the various groups, all of those things. I think it's just a positive thing that we need to do. And the cop thing goes along with being appreciated just by eliminating the neighborhoods that those cops are even going to be in the first place.
Right. Well, poverty is an inevitable result of having a capitalist system. So you can't, there are things that could be done to make life better for poor people, but essentially we're going to have poor people in an economic system like the one that we do.
Let me ask you going to that point. This notion of how do you structurally change that? And this gets to this notion of critical race theory. And there was a fascinating exchange that took place between Mark Lamont on CNN and a gentleman, Rufio, I believe his name is. Rufo.
Christopher F. Rufo, I think it was.
Yeah, that was against critical race theory. Now, I had to look this up to figure out what this was. And as I was looking into it, I was like, okay. Now, the argument is illustrative of the conversation these guys were having. I guess my point is it possible that in order for this system or our society to change, that the perspective of the various people in it, as they grow up and as they move through it on some level, has to change? Hence, in their heads, this is what needs to be done in order to make that work. Now, let's hear Mark Lamont, because I think that's his point of view. Let's play the clip.
Even my Republican friends in Congress, not a single one of them voted for the rescue plan. I'm not going to embarrass anyone, but I have here a list.
Different clips.
Yeah.
You were saying later.
Of how back in their districts they're bragging about.
Yeah, hey, Andre, yeah, we've got a different clip. It sounds like there was a Mark Lamont Hill clip, I believe it was. It was supposed to be played here.
But it's okay. We'll come back to it. But basically, they're arguing back and forth on this notion of whether or not it should be taught. Republicans have gotten heavy into this mindset that this is a problem. Yes.
He's got it.
Oh, excellent. Okay, let's play it.
I'm happy.
Wait,
they know.
This is still the wrong clip.
Wait, right now, Christopher, what do you like about
There we
being
go.
white? What would you say?
I don't know. Again, it's such an amorphous term. It's like a census term or a
But can you do me a favor? Indulge me. Indulge me for one. We're running out of time. Indulge me for a minute. I understand you see it as all these things, but you surely recognize that the world sees you as white. You know the world reads you as white. And if you were to ask me some things I like about being black, I could talk about cultural norms. I could talk about tradition. I could talk about the kind of commonalities I feel around the diaspora. If I were to ask you particularly if you're saying whiteness is a thing that is being constructed as negative and shouldn't be, name something positive that you like about being white.
Well, sure. I'll answer with a thing. There's a lot of documents that are floating around public schools that say things like timeliness, showing up on time, is a white supremacist value or a white dominant value. Things like rationality, things like the Enlightenment, things like objectivity, and these are very strange things to be ascribed to a racial identity. My view is that these are actually should be ascribed to every individual human being. Every individual human being, regardless of whatever racial category we impose on them.
Christopher, that doesn't answer the question, though. You're telling me you're making straw men about things that are ascribed to whiteness that you think are wrongfully ascribed to whiteness. I'm saying if whiteness isn't a negative thing, and there's something that that whiteness actually shouldn't be constructed as all negative, name something positive that you believe is positive about being white.
Again, I don't buy into the framework that the world can be reduced into these metaphysical categories of whiteness and blackness. I think that's wrong. I think we should look at people as individuals. I think we should celebrate different people's accomplishments. And again, I think the idea, you mentioned Ignatieff. Ignatieff says the goal is to, quote, abolish the white race. In any other context, this would be interpreted as a near genocidal slur. I don't buy into it. The reason I'm not going to answer your question is I reject that categorization. I think of myself as an individual human being with my own capabilities. And I would hope that we could both judge each other as individuals and come to common values on that basis.
That is a fascinating conversation. So in one sense, Mark Lamont is trying to make the point of saying, look, the critical race theory thing, whether you like it in theory, whether you like it in practice, either way, one way or the other, it is necessary for people to understand how people move through society as a social construct and how that affects them in an economic, socioeconomic way, even in regards to interpersonal relationships, even, this notion of blacks serving longer in jail sentences or blacks being denied medication. Those things aren't economic. Those things are interpersonal in the way that they engage. And the other cat like, oh, no, man, I don't accept those distinctions. And the catches is like, well, that's kind of the point that Mark Lamont is making, whether you like CRT or not. It's you have the luxury of not being able to accept those. Like, I don't accept that stuff because you're basically functioning almost as this kind of default level as you move through society. Others aren't. And there's some need to acknowledge that. And is that necessary? Like, is that the thing that is necessary for some level of change in your eyes? Or too far? Like I'm curious on how you see that conversation and how you see what was being said here.
Well, I don't know. I wish somebody would define for me what critical race theory is. I'm not sure what it is, and I think the people railing against it don't know what it is.
I can give
either.
I think I could give a definition. I mean, there's critical theory.
Okay.
There's critical theory, which, as far as I can tell, is a way of reviewing text and simply human communication. But it started with text, where instead of analyzing the conceptual content of the works you're reading, you look for suggestions of how power is sort of latent in the expressions, in what's what's included and what's left out of the text. So if you have a tract of philosophy, you look at what the writer, what power they have, what society they were operating in, and you try to relate it. And then critical race, and you can use critical theory as a lens for looking at things. It's useful. And I'm not even, I don't think it should be your only lens, but you can use that, okay, let me look at this situation and how has power affected it. You can use that as a useful lens. And that critical race theory, I believe, is looking at races in terms of the power differentials between these different races. Right. That would be the definition I'd give.
And their relationship in regard to individuals in our society, that type of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so that sounds fine to me. But I think that there's this firestorm about it because people want to protect the system, which is inherently racist. And if you ask too many questions, the whole foundation may crumble. But as far as that interchange between the two, I was a little disconnected, frankly. I wasn't sure where that conversation sort of started.
It felt like a gotcha. But I'm happy to answer it for myself.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
What I weirdly like about being white, and this was the first thing that came to mind, is when I'm outside for a long enough time and I'm in the sun and my skin gets this nice little golden hue. Yeah. And I share that with our neighbors, the Caucasian neighbors, or near neighbors of the Caucasians or whatever. Not that I'm even from the Caucasus Mountains. I guess I share that with people in the Middle East. There's a certain hue to my skin that I'm like, oh wow, that looks very well tanned. And I physically enjoy the look of that. But I don't know what white culture is. And that's partly because as a term, it's a bastardization of European cultures generally. But I also understand why people have used the word white to reference a culture, because European colonization as a wave led to the creation of this sort of racial superclass in this whole colonization process. I get that. But I guess what's ironic to me about this whole thing is that races, the very idea of them, were created by racists in the 19th century, like Francis Galton and the other scientists who were looking at racial groups and trying to classify which ones were better and which ones were worse. And this whole conversation, not about ethnicities or cultures, but specifically about races, has inherited a classification scheme invented by racists.
Right. Well, but you hit on the most important thing. Nobody was white until Europeans left Europe.
Yeah, it wasn't a thing. You were Spanish or French or Occitan or whatever.
French or Spanish or British or whatever. But when you leave and invade and colonize other places, now you're white. So that is where whiteness begins. Whiteness begins with aggression. Whiteness begins with invasion, with genocide, with enslavement. That's where whiteness begins. And if people are going to defend and consider themselves white, that is part of what they are defending. And you can't get out of that. And I guess that's if there's anything that good that came from that exchange, I think that's it.
Yeah.
So that's what it. If you're talking about being white, especially in this country, that's what you're owning. You're owning that.
And here's the thing. You were just talking about it, Jamarl, and probably I am blessed with it because for the most part, I do not think in terms of I am white. I don't think in terms of I am that race. And I guess I should be squirming in my seat here, but maybe I've had too much coffee or something and I'm not actually uncomfortable talking about this. I probably am blessed with not actually, by default, having those racial distinctions,
it's like a default.
Sort of imprinted into me. And the whole W.E.B. Du Bois thing about double consciousness
stuff,
exactly. Different people are different. I guess I can enter into that when I suddenly become aware of it, but by default, I'm not aware of it. And I don't feel like there is even though technically I can see it, I don't feel like I'm a part of a white cultural grouping or something like that. But I also don't feel Scottish. I don't feel Irish. I don't feel Norwegian, even though those are my, ancestral groups or whatever. It seems, and this is the whole part of, I've heard the term cultural decolonization or just decolonization used to refer to this cultural thing where you try to discover your sort of pre-colonial ancestorship and where you came from, where your culture came from, as a response to this, which is interesting. The idea that there's something essential, this sort of essentialist take. Okay, there's something within me that precedes all these ideas of racism and the culture that I come from. Going back and discovering that really appeals to people at this point. Margaret, what's your take on that? Fit into this process. Different connections we can go, but I think you understand what I'm talking about sort of rediscovering these pre-racial groups. What's your take on that?
Well, that can be interesting for a lot of reasons and enjoyable to learn about one's one's heritage. But But unless you're going back to Norway or going back to Scotland,
Don't plan to. Don't plan to.
What's that?
I said I don't plan to. I don't think so.
Okay.
Although I hear the fjords are beautiful, so maybe. Anyway.
I'm sure, but unless you're going to do that and really take away the American concept of being white, it's just an interesting exercise. But I think that the important thing for white people, and it's difficult to do because there's no value in making people defensive for the sake of making them defensive. But I do have to say, white people have to think about the role they play in this country. And that, and it doesn't mean being a cop like Derek Chauvin who kills people. It can mean something that things people take for granted. For example, in the workplace, there's an opening and you get a friend hired for the job. Now, if you're white, your friend also is probably white. So it's something simple that people, may not perceive as being racist or anything, but it ends up giving an advantage to your group.
That is institutional racism that you're talking about, or just the sort of subconscious.
And it's something that many people, especially many liberals, would be aghast if one were to suggest something they've done their whole lives is somehow racist, but it is.
And that's we were talking. This reminds me of a conversation we had with Ted earlier. And Jamarl, I'm sorry for jumping in on this.
No, you're
jumping in on this. But what's the line between that and like the noblesse oblige thing? Well, the self-righteous liberal who's like self-effacing and not actually doing anything, but feeling pretty hoity-toity because they're walking the walk in their eyes and certainly talking the talk. Margaret, doesn't that just lead to that? Because I hear what you're saying, and I think that we do need to be white people specifically do need to be aware of what we do and what we don't do, and of how racism, which is something that we are aware of, but maybe don't see or aren't cognizant of by default. How do you stop that awareness from turning into pretentiousness by people who sort of hook onto it consciously or not? I think you see what I'm saying, Margaret.
Well, people should not see that as pretentious. People should see that as being seriously non-racist. People have to take these things seriously, and and people need to own how they feel if someone says that, own their defensiveness and say, maybe they're angry at being thought of that way, but just take that in and think about that and strive to do something differently and accept that there are things that are considered normative that no one gives a second thought, which are, in fact, racist. And it's very delicate to try to discuss these things with people. But if you're really serious about it, people have to think about the things they do that they don't give a second thought to, which are, in fact, racist. And that's not being pretentious. That's being serious about it. And if you're not going to do that, then don't bother, which is okay, too, but be honest. And so if you can't accept that something that you didn't think of as racist, you didn't think of it as being wrong in any way, but in fact the result is one that perpetuates institutional racism. So that is what we're asking. I know it's a lot to ask of people to change a system that benefits them.
I think it depends on the specifics. Jamarl, you were going to say something.
Well, yes, I think it is a lot to ask people. I mean, because ultimately you would have to say, okay, the overwhelming majority of the population that has an advantage built into the system and the way that the system operates would need to upheave that particular system. And that gets into the whole, like the change in resources and all this other stuff. So it is. I mean, but it's not a wrong ask. It's not there. I guess that's not where I'm going with that. I'm making the point it's the right ask. It's just a difficult ask. I am curious about something else before you go, though. Biden's budget. And Biden ran on $15 an hour. What Biden has passed was a $1.9 trillion bill that Donald Trump was trying to pass, a $1.8 trillion, that they blocked him on passing. But I'm just trying to make the point that both were trying to do it. Where's this FDR stuff going? And not just that, how are you getting an infrastructure bill passed? How are you getting your public option passed? How are you getting any of this stuff passed? So it's like, regardless of the talk, you have basically the reality of things, of none of this stuff is getting done. And all of this has to do with Democrats. This is not Republicans. So,
yes.
So what, like, where does this go for Democrats going forward? I mean, because this is like,
Well,
and not, yeah.
That FDR stuff was phony.
Yes, it was.
$3 bill. It was a lot of propaganda for Biden. And but you're absolutely right. We have,
but
not
it does hit at something though, where it seems that they recognize something is changing.
Well, they realize, yeah, they want to do the same thing they've done, but they can't. They have to pretend. Hence the propaganda and the cutting child poverty in half. No, he's transformative like FDR. No. And but these Democrats, in quotes, these putative Democrats, who, you know, Manchin is the poster child, but he's not the only one, who don't want anything to change that benefits people. They are overtly loyal to the neoliberal project, and they don't want even a tiny bit of change. So this minuscule minimum wage, even the plan to make it go up to a measly $15 an hour over 5 years was unacceptable to them. But he's not the only one. So, you know, they do, it's a shell game. So they'll say, you know, Biden is proposing this $1.9 trillion budget, but the mean Republicans won't let him help the people. But they're mean Democrats who won't let him help the people. So none of it is very impressive to me. It's just more theater, you know, as I and others have called it, professional wrestling, fake heroes, fake...
Kayfabe. You know what I'm talking about right there, Margaret?
Yes.
Exactly. And I agree with you. That's what it is. Margaret, fun conversation. And, you know, there are ways in which it might not have been, but fun conversation. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Oh, you're welcome.
And for those listening, that was the voice of Margaret Kimberly. She is one of the main people, specifically the senior columnist and editor over at Black Agenda Report. She's also an author. You should check out her books. Most recent one, I believe, Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. Go check that out. And you can follow Margaret on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog. You can also find her work at blackagendareport.com. And you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break. And when we come back, our phone lines are wide open, 202-521-1320. I can see from here we've got some calls on the line, but let me tell you, we've got room for more, 202-521-1320. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we are back, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, that's 202-521-1320. You can call in. In fact, you should call in to this morning's show. Fascinating, as always. Quick note before I get into conversation and start taking calls here. We are going to be off the air on Monday. It is Memorial Day. We're now entering Memorial Day weekend. Hope everybody has a great weekend, but we'll see you again on Tuesday, not Monday, at 7 a.m. Eastern. One brief note too, Jamarl, because I can say it, because it's decriminalized in D.C., I'm just going to say it. I want to normalize this thing. I had a great light mushrooms dose trip thing yesterday. Psychedelic drugs are very useful.
Very nice.
I strongly recommend them for people. I took about a gram of mushrooms. They're decriminalized in D.C., so for those listening,
it's legal.
I feel perfectly
it's legal.
justified.
I know, right?
Exactly.
Doesn't it feel amazing to feel affirmed?
It's
like,
the thing.
I did drugs and I enjoy it. Yeah, I love that.
And I prefer these to marijuana. I prefer these to other drugs. If there was one drug I would do, it'd probably be mushrooms.
Really?
Yeah.
How long does that
it lasts about 5-6 hours, something like that.
That always gets me. But it's the ride. It's like I'm trapped into this thing for X number of hours.
You feel so good, though.
I was telling you the day before that I had my own Salvia dividorium.
Salvia.
Salvia dividorium. Right.
Yeah.
It's, again, legal in Maryland. It's not a fun drug, so it's not like, oh, let's just go do this and hang out and just have some right.
No,
it's not that way. And Shane is terrified of it.
I've done it twice. I just don't ever want to do it again.
It's a weird drug because it's disassociative. Like it's very strange. I guess in mine, it's like the walls melt. You have this kind of weird thing where they're like these geometric patterns and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm always terrified of the dose, so I'm always like just off the edge of the all right. It's like,
well, you can do that with salvia too, because if anybody who's gotten into salvia,
short dose,
it's short dose, but they also have like concentrates. It's like a 25x or 100x. Or I forget. It's been a long enough time since I've done it that
20x
exactly,
and like a tiny puff, and it's like, all right, I can handle that.
Yeah,
and it's a 3-minute trip or ride or whatever you want to call it. The thing is, it's very strange, and it's like you start doing experiments. It's like, all right, can I hold on to myself? And it's like, think about what you're saying for the moment. What does that even mean?
Can I hold it? And you're describing, you keep coming back to yourself. Okay, I'm here again. Okay, I'm here again.
It's so strange.
In some sense, that's just how we work. There are all these holes in our attention, even our identity, like the holes in between the atoms in space. And nevertheless, we feel ourselves there. We're stitched together between these, these vast spaces. Anyway,
very strange.
One more thing before we go to calls. I recently realized I've done DMT once. I did actually see machine elves when I did it. I know.
Have you?
Did
they talk to you?
And
did
I realized
you have a
this is
conversation?
a long time ago that I did this, even though this is now fully decriminalized in DC as well as far as I can tell. DMT, you can buy a vape pen of it, for God's sake.
That's shocking to me.
But
none of these things are like...
I know. And it's
with the exception of maybe shrooms. It's like this kind of, let's just go hang out, let's go listen to music, etc.
Yeah,
DMT.
peyote/mescaline, you got DMT.
Yeah.
People doing ayahuasca with decriminalization. All this stuff. All this intense stuff. Anyway,
that is intense.
I'm the kind of person
that is mind-blowing.
I would by default be like, no, I didn't see machine elves just because I wanted to be different from people. But I recently realized for the longest time when people said machine elves, I thought they were talking about those little, like Santa Claus elves, like small elves that are mischievous or something.
What was it like? What was
They're like fractal nobles. I don't know how else to put it. They're like fractally constructed. I can see why people would use the word machine to it. And elves, more like elvish nobility from Lord of the Rings or something like this, where they're like
talking to you,
ornate fractal regalia. And I don't know if talking is the right word, but communicating something like that.
Now, what did they communicate to you?
That all of life in the universe, you can think of it as DNA almost.
Yeah.
Where it's this tree of life, this vivid, vibrant, growing structure that splinters off and constantly creates new material realities, like dimensions, but also little living things, biological things. Anyway, we got callers. I don't want to take too long for that thing, but 202-521-1320. We got Shelly calling in from Michigan. Shelly, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
So I actually wanted to call and just make two quick comments. One from the Mark Frost interview from yesterday, which was an amazing interview, by the way. I loved it. I just wanted to point out that we're talking about, like, the economic system and capitalism and everything. With franchisees owners, they're more like business sharecroppers in, like, the whole sense of the economy, as in, like, they don't really make much from it, but they, like, still profit out, but it mainly all goes to corporations. But onto the interview that you guys just did, I just wanted to say, as just another white person, I completely agree with Shane. Like, there is no, like, white community. It's just, like, a default setting as, like, an individual. And it's just, it's not great.
I hear you. Well, and here's the other thing is that I think from what Margaret said, I think Margaret would agree with that, because the idea is it's like the water in which we're swimming. It's the baseline. It's the normal. I get that.
Notice it.
But I'm also not the type of person to be particularly self-flagellating about it. And in other words, I don't want to be like, I don't
that's the catch.
I don't want to just feel guilty. That's not my natural response, and that's not what I do with it. Anyway, Jamarl.
Well, I was just saying that's the rub. It's this notion of, it's like, how do you get across? All right, this was the historical context. I know you individually are not responsible because you are a vampire. You weren't there,
but you had the opportunity.
Or there's it's a social construct to which you're a part of that you are benefiting from. It's not the problem is self-flagellation comes into it. That's what Republicans will say. Yeah, this is self-flagellation.
I hear you.
How dare you? It's that stuff.
Shelley, you were saying something there. What were you saying?
Oh, yeah, I was just, like, still, I feel like for every white person, there is, like, that white guilt you got to work through. But then once you, like, make peace with it and be like, me personally, no, I'm not personally responsible, but I can still, like...
They're just saying you benefit. That's all that I think they're saying. It's like, well, you have a benefit based on a social construct in which you were born into, as opposed to others that don't.
No. No, I'm just not benefit, but like
The feeling of guilt.
for everything that's happened. Like,
The feeling that you're supposed to feel.
That, like,
You're supposed to feel this guilt.
I
just flinch away from it. I tend not to look at it or think about it. I pay it no heed, no mind.
I flee when it comes to my mind.
Yeah, and I'm not even cognizant of the words that I'm saying right now. I'm an automaton. Shelley, I didn't mean to take that into a weird direction as I often do. Thank you for the call. We got 3 more, and I want to make sure we have time to get to them. Shelley from Michigan, thank you for the call. Let's go to David calling in from Kansas City, talking also about critical race theory. David, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I don't want to disparage your last guest, but I think I'm more thinking in a broader context of the conversation, in specifically more like Robin DiAngelo. And perhaps
White Fragility, I believe, is the title of the book there.
Perhaps I've maybe done, quote-unquote, more of the work subconsciously over the last 20 years as I've been exposed to, broader cultures. But I found as an adult that if I put into practice the theory put forth by individuals like Robin DiAngelo, I don't feel like it would actually net out the results that I think we're all saying we're hoping for.
No, I don't know what the theories are. And that's the catch with the CRT stuff.
Before, like I can swim well in cross-cultural settings. Like some people have actually been part of my community. This gets called as like a racist thing, but like some of my best friends are black, right?
Yeah.
Or as like a card to show, see, I'm not racist. But what I will say is like I have like brotherly type relationships with people that would be identified as black and I'd be identified as a white man. And I don't think Robin DiAngelo has anything to really teach me that would produce more of those results. And I think that the theory actually ends up benefiting more of the academic sociology.
And look, it may be one of those things where, hey, this sounds good in theory, but how does it look in practice?
Working class black man, like I think if Robin DiAngelo and starts talking to some of the guys that I know or women that I know, they would be like, what I can't say the word.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Like,
same here.
Talking about.
Yeah, same here.
Like, get out of my face with this nonsense. So, but I also did want to appreciate you guys. You brought some levity with the mushroom comments.
It's true.
I know, right?
I had a really good
could,
experience. I recommend. I don't want to force anything on people, but yeah, I love those guys. Anyway, I'm lucky. Unlike Robin DiAngelo or any of the readers, when I was younger, I actually got an honorary black card.
Did you?
That I now am able to flash in order to enter black country clubs.
Yeah.
Black Wall Street, everywhere.
All that stuff.
It's very useful. No, sometimes you make jokes and they fall flat on their face. We're talking about thorny stuff, and I try to add levity, and hopefully I don't get hamstrung at any point.
No, I think we did great with the conversation.
Yeah.
And look, I think
Margaret's cool.
I think he has a point, right? I mean, I get the academics of it. I get like, all right, there's an issue in society. How do you stop? Because Margaret has a point. If you notice, she was like, I don't know what that has to do with, him being killed. It's like, well, look at the communities that the people are being killed in. I mean, Jacob Blake, if you look at where he was killed was shot in Wisconsin, that entire area, the majority of the places that were black were prisons or jails that is horrendous. Like you're talking about a condition or areas where this stuff is taking place. That takes nothing away from cops killing people. It's just making the point that is it a correlation with where those people or some level of being killed. Either way, it's so from a point. She immediately hit me on it because there are a lot of people disagree with me on that front. But either way, I still think the poverty thing has a big deal with it. Let's go to do we have another caller?
We do. We got 2 more.
Let's go to
Malik calling in from D.C., talking racism and Black Wall Street. Malik, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but much of the dialogue that's taking place today. I mean, I'm sure there are folks out there, like myself, who are longtime organizers and work with revolutionary organizations. We're pulling our hair out. Like the young man who just talked a second ago, the last caller. The African, the folks from the African working class that he probably knows, they're, in many ways, are products of colonial mentalities. I mean, this is, and I want to speak also, Shane, to, your discussion about the identity of whiteness. You talked about you and your brother biking across the country.
Not across the country. That'd be cool, but no, not yet. But anyway.
Well, not across the country, but
going on bike trips,
biking. Yeah. Right, and I've driven across the country, and my experience of driving across the country by myself as a black man, I'm not a scared kind of person, but I'm sure it would have terrified many people. I mean, I encountered racist state police making my way across the country. I encountered white men chasing me down the freeway.
Ooh.
So if you want to connect and figure out what your white identity is, your white identity is the ability to do those things freely. And
but look, Shane is not saying.
And let me.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let me just kind of put a cap on it. Yeah. With any and to be able to say within a white colonial culture, which America is, and African people and indigenous people are colonized people here. This is a colonizer culture. To be able to say, hey, I don't identify with to have the luxury to say I don't identify with the construct of whiteness while actually enjoying the benefits of that construct. And I know we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, Malik, we're close to our last minute.
But it is true.
And I think I said that.
Yeah, you didn't say that.
I think I said no, but I think I said I probably am blessed to be able to have that kind of thing because I don't know. Malik, points taken. Nate, I'm sorry we didn't get to you. I believe you also called in last hour. And I think just through bad luck of the draw, you came in last on these calls. Please don't take it personally. Anyway, we got to close today's show out. I think good show. Interesting conversations. I want to thank all of our callers, all of our guests, our producers, audio engineer, my co-host Jamarl Thomas, and you for listening to this morning's show. Have a great weekend. We'll be back on Tuesday.